Deep beneath the ocean sits one of the most recognizable homes in television history, a simple pineapple that became SpongeBob SquarePants' house. But behind that bright yellow shell is a stranger story involving a cargo ship, Squidward's garden, and a pineapple that somehow survived at the bottom of the sea. In this video, we break down the complete timeline of SpongeBob's house. Section 1: The House That Fell from the Sky. SpongeBob SquarePants premiered on May 1, 1999, on Nickelodeon, immediately following the broadcast of that year's Kids' Choice Awards. The episode was called Help Wanted, and within its first 30 seconds the audience already knew everything they needed to know about where the show lived. A French narrator announced a pineapple under the sea. An alarm clock shaped like a foghorn went off inside it. And SpongeBob SquarePants, a yellow rectangular sea sponge, launched himself off a diving board inside the fruit, landed in his SquarePants, and declared himself ready to face the day. Before that premiere date, the pilot episode had already existed for 2 years. Hillenburg completed Help Wanted in 1997, well before Nickelodeon had scheduled it for broadcast. The episode sat finished while the network figured out what to do with it. When it finally aired in May of 1999, very little had changed from the 1997 version. The same pineapple stood on Conch Street. The same rooms were inside it. The same design carried from the original production to the broadcast that introduced the show to roughly 65 million viewers in its first week. Stephen Hillenburg was not primarily a television writer when he created the show. He was a marine science educator who had spent years teaching ocean biology to visitors at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California, and who had assembled an educational comic book called The Intertidal Zone while doing it, populated with anthropomorphic sea creatures that would eventually evolve into the cast of Bikini Bottom. He also had a background in art and animation, which is how he ended up working as a director on Rocko's Modern Life before leaving to develop his own series. When Nickelodeon gave him the green light to produce SpongeBob, he was working simultaneously from two deep pools of knowledge: the real biology of the ocean and the visual grammar of animation. Polynesian culture was one of Hillenburg's reference points during the design phase. In interviews before his death in 2018, he described drawing freely across different image sources while trying to find the right homes for his characters, and noted that the pineapple appeared as a recurring motif in Polynesian fabric and textile design. He drew a pineapple to see what would happen in his own description of the process. What happened is that it fit. The shape was distinctive, the color was warm and bright, and something about putting a sponge inside a tropical fruit under the ocean captured the specific kind of whimsy he was after. The choice also drew on pineapple's long history as a symbol of hospitality in many cultures, which is not an accident given that SpongeBob is the warmest and most welcoming character in the show. Drawing the pineapple was one decision. Designing everything that would go inside it and deciding how its exterior would relate to its neighborhood was the larger project that the early production needed to solve. Hillenburg and his team settled on a layout for Conch Street that placed 3 very different structures next to each other: a pineapple, an Easter Island head, and an underground rock. The diversity of architectural forms was deliberate, since each structure said something specific about the character inside it. SpongeBob's pineapple was bright, tropical, and cheerful. Squidward's moai was ancient and pretentious, and slightly melancholy. Patrick's rock was almost nothing at all. The result was a neighborhood that felt designed from the inside out. Each house was a character description, made architectural, which is a different approach from most animated neighborhoods, where houses tend to look like variations on a single suburban template. On Conch Street, the houses are so unlike each other that the street itself becomes a piece of comedy, a running joke about what happens when wildly incompatible personalities are placed next to each other with no distance between them. Nothing about the first scene of Help Wanted announces the pineapple as the subject of careful design thought. The house appears and the show moves on. SpongeBob wakes up, gets dressed, and runs toward the Krusty Krab without pausing to explain where he lives or why. The pineapple is simply present. The way a character's home in a well-built show is simply present, understood as given rather than introduced as a concept. The audience did not need to be told it was a pineapple. They could see it. That visual legibility is part of why the choice worked. A pineapple is immediately recognizable at any size, at any distance, and in any orientation. The leaves at the top, the textured skin in the middle, the proportional relationship between height and width, all of these come across in a small frame on a television screen at the scale the show uses for exterior shots. Hillenburg could cut to Conch Street from any direction, and the audience would know exactly where they were the moment the pineapple was visible. 10 years after that premiere, the show provided an answer to a question that had been sitting unaddressed since 1999. How did the pineapple get there? The answer arrived in Truth or Square, a made-for-television special that aired November 6, 2009, produced to celebrate the show's 10th anniversary. The special drew 7.7 million viewers on its premiere night, making it basic cable's top entertainment program for the week. Among other things it showed, including SpongeBob's first visit to the Krusty Krab as an infant and a brief and highly questionable wedding ceremony between SpongeBob and Sandy, it provided a flashback to the moment the pineapple arrived in Bikini Bottom. What Truth or Square shows is this: a cargo ship on the ocean's surface is transporting fruit. A pineapple falls off the ship and sinks toward the seafloor. Below, on Conch Street, Squidward has been tending a garden, a small and carefully maintained flower arrangement, in the space where SpongeBob's house would eventually stand. The pineapple lands directly on Squidward's garden, destroying it. Squidward, furious, cuts a hole through the pineapple's side to free himself. The hole is exactly where SpongeBob's front door will be for every subsequent episode of the series. SpongeBob, who happens to be nearby and homeless, sees the pineapple and declares it beautiful. The house is occupied. Squidward had been cultivating that garden for some undisclosed period before the pineapple arrived. The flashback does not specify how long. It establishes only that the garden was finished, that it represented something Squidward had invested care into, and that it was destroyed in an instant by a piece of fruit falling from the sky. This detail is consistent with what the show does to Squidward constantly across its run, which is to take whatever he values most and flatten it, literally or metaphorically, before he has had a chance to enjoy it. The pineapple's origin story is, among other things, the earliest recorded example of Squidward losing something to SpongeBob through no action of SpongeBob's own. A hole appears where Squidward cut his exit, and the show's universe apparently transforms it into a functional doorframe between one shot and the next. This is treated as unremarkable by everyone present, including Squidward, which is the show's standard approach to anything that would require explanation if it happened in the real world. The pineapple is a house. It has always been a house. It was a fruit, and then it was a house, and the transition between those two states is not something Truth or Square felt any need to account for. Real pineapples decompose faster than any structure built to last a decade should. At room temperature, an uncut pineapple typically begins to deteriorate within 1 to 2 days, with the outer skin softening and darkening, the internal sugar concentrations drawing bacterial activity, and the bromelain enzyme beginning to break down the proteins in the fruit. The maximum shelf life for a whole fresh pineapple, stored under optimal conditions, is approximately 14 days. After that, the fruit has broken down enough that it cannot be described as structurally intact. Salt water accelerates that process through osmosis. When an organic material with a relatively high water and sugar content is submerged in salt water, the salt gradient draws moisture out of the material through its permeable surfaces, while salt penetrates inward, disrupting cellular structure. Pineapple skin is not perfectly impermeable, which means the exterior of a submerged pineapple would begin to degrade within hours of submersion, rather than days. Deep-sea temperatures slow biological processes somewhat, but the microorganisms that drive decomposition are present at depth and functional at cold temperatures, simply operating more slowly than they would in a warm environment. Bikini Atoll, the real geographic location that Bikini Bottom is supposedly modeled on, sits in the Pacific Ocean and is associated with relatively shallow atoll water rather than deep-sea trenches. The temperatures in the shallow waters around an atoll are warmer than the deep ocean, which would speed the biological decomposition of a pineapple rather than slow it. A whole pineapple submerged in shallow tropical adjacent saltwater, exposed to the bacteria, fungi, and marine organisms that inhabit that environment, would be structurally compromised within a matter of days and unrecognizable as a pineapple within a few weeks. Bromelain, the enzyme that gives fresh pineapple its characteristic ability to break down protein, is also working inside the fruit from the moment it enters the water. Bromelain is active in the presence of moisture, which salt water provides abundantly. The enzyme would be accelerating the breakdown of the pineapple's own cellular structure from the inside, while bacteria and osmotic pressure attacked from the outside. The conditions for a rapid end are present on every side simultaneously. Bikini Atoll's real-world history adds a layer to all of this that the show never addresses. The atoll was the site of American nuclear weapons testing between 1946 and 1958, with 23 nuclear devices detonated there across that period. The residents of Bikini Atoll were relocated before the testing began and have not been able to return to a fully habitable environment since. The atoll was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2010, and the underwater conditions near it, including the sunken ships from the nuclear tests, have been documented extensively by marine scientists. The show places a cheerful animated city directly below the location of significant nuclear contamination, which it never acknowledges, and presumably never intended as a comment. 124 Conch Street is the address the show has assigned to the pineapple, confirmed across multiple episodes, including Blackjack and Pet Sitter Pat, where the post office uses both the numerical address and the alternate designations of simply the pineapple or the big pineapple. The specific number does not appear to carry particular significance beyond being a plausible residential address. What the address establishes is that the pineapple exists within a postal system, within a numbered street, within a functioning suburban district of Bikini Bottom, all of which requires the audience to accept the pineapple as a permanent and stable structure rather than a temporary piece of decomposing fruit. One window is visible on the front of SpongeBob's house in Help Wanted, which is a detail that distinguishes the pilot from nearly every subsequent episode. From the second episode onward, the house almost always appears with multiple windows on the front elevation. The single-window pilot design was one of several small inconsistencies between the 1997 recording and the version of the show that would run for decades. SpongeBob himself had fewer holes in the pilot. His voice was slightly lower. The colors were marginally different. Patrick's voice was deeper. These are the kind of production differences that accumulate when a pilot is made years before the regular series begins production, and the character designs have not yet fully settled. Inside the house in the pilot, SpongeBob's bedroom is established with his bed on the right side of the room. In almost every subsequent episode, the bed is on the left. The inconsistency was never addressed. The show simply moved the bed between 1997 and 1999 and kept it in its new position for the next 25 years. That kind of small, uncelebrated continuity correction is everywhere in the early episodes, and together they describe a production team that was still calibrating what the show was as it was broadcasting the show. Those early design differences matter to the house's timeline because they establish that the pineapple was never a fixed, fully resolved object from the moment it appeared on screen. It was a starting point. The house changed in small ways between the pilot and the first proper season, and it continued to change in larger and more dramatic ways across every season that followed. Some of those changes were the result of deliberate creative decisions. Some were the result of the show needing the house to be different for a specific story, and some were the result of nobody keeping close enough track of a building that was supposed to be the same building every week. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The pineapple arrived on Conch Street and became a house in one afternoon. What happens next is the first time the show tested its own premise by removing the house entirely, reducing it to a seed, and finding out whether the show's world would let SpongeBob stay homeless. Section 2. The Night the Nematodes Drank the House. Home Sweet Pineapple is the second segment of the fifth episode of the first season, written by Ennio Torreson Jr., Mr. Lawrence, and Eric Wiese, and directed by Ennio Torreson Jr. It aired on August 14, 1999, 3 months after the series premiere, paired with Pizza Delivery in the same broadcast slot. Of the two segments that evening, Pizza Delivery is the one most fans cite as a Season 1 masterpiece. Home Sweet Pineapple is the one that established how the show would treat the pineapple for every season that followed it. August 14, 1999 was also, according to the wiki, the first time Bikini Atoll itself appeared within an episode rather than just in the opening theme song. The show had established in the theme that SpongeBob lived under the sea, and the atoll had been the visual anchor of that opening since the premiere. Showing it within an episode proper was a small but deliberate anchoring of the geography, a reminder that this specific piece of ocean floor had a real-world counterpart above the water. The episode chose to do that for the first time during the story, where the floor's most important landmark disappears entirely. Nematodes are among the most abundant animals on Earth. Scientists estimate that approximately 57 billion of them exist for every human being alive, distributed across every environment on the planet, from deep-sea trenches to the upper layers of soil in gardens, from Arctic permafrost to the digestive systems of most vertebrate animals. There are roughly 20,000 described species, and estimates suggest the total number of species may be several times higher. They are, by volume and count, one of the dominant life forms on the planet, and most people never see one. The vast majority of nematode species are between 0.1 and 2.5 millimeters long, which is to say, microscopic, or near enough that they require magnification to observe. Most nematode species are free-living, feeding on bacteria, fungi, or other tiny organisms in the soil or water. A significant minority are parasitic, and this is where real nematode biology intersects with the show's premise, if only loosely. Plant parasitic nematodes do attack roots and plant tissues, puncturing plant cells with a needle-like mouthpart called a stylet, and feeding on the cellular contents. Root knot nematodes, cyst nematodes, and several other parasitic groups cause significant agricultural damage across the world, weakening and eventually killing affected plants. In that sense, a nematode attacking a pineapple is not a biologically absurd premise. In the show, the nematodes arrive in Bikini Bottom as a crowd, moving in formation and announcing their condition out loud. First hungry, then thirsty. They eat through a coral structure, and then through a passing motorboat, before becoming thirsty. They then produce straws, insert them into the exterior of SpongeBob's house, and drink. Straws are what the episode implies. The exterior lines of the pineapple are, or at minimum, what can be used as such. A real pineapple's external texture, the overlapping diamond-shaped pattern of scales, is called the fruitlet skin, and covers the individual fruitlets that make up the pineapple's flesh. It is not hollow, it does not contain accessible liquid, and it cannot function as a drinking straw by any mechanism available in nature. But the episode established, in its own internal logic, that the juice content of the pineapple house is accessible through the exterior surface, which is consistent with the pineapple being treated as a real fruit throughout the scene. As the nematodes drink, everything inside the house shrinks proportionally with the shrinking house, which is a visual joke about the relationship between the fruit's volume and its interior contents. Everything inside shrinks as the nematodes drink, following the logic that the house's contents are scaled to its size. SpongeBob and Gary are not affected because they are living occupants rather than furnishings, which is the rule the episode silently establishes. Chairs, tables, shelves, and the objects sitting on them all grow smaller as the liquid volume of the house decreases. SpongeBob wakes to find the ceiling is now at knee height, realizes the house is not smaller but actively getting smaller, and watches it disappear around him until he and Gary are standing on the open sand of Conch Street with nothing behind them but a tiny pebble. Losing a house in a matter of hours while sleeping inside it, with no prior warning and no legal recourse, is a specific kind of disaster that requires immediate solutions. SpongeBob's first is to call Squidward, which he does while the house is still shrinking. Squidward's response is to ask if this is the time SpongeBob chose to ruin his day, and to hang up. The shell phone then shrinks out of existence before the call can be continued. No further assistance comes from that direction. Patrick's Rock presents the first alternative shelter on offer, and the episode spends a small amount of time inside it that clarifies the Rock's situation. Patrick offers SpongeBob the guest room. Patrick does not have a guest room. The Rock is, like most rocks, a single undifferentiated space, and it barely has room for Patrick. SpongeBob and Gary squeeze in anyway, and what follows is a brief sequence of Patrick's various habits and behaviors, making the arrangement untenable. A different episode might have extended that sequence, but Home Sweet Pineapple is not interested in dwelling there. It moves SpongeBob toward Squidward's house because that is the funnier destination. Gary is specifically mentioned as part of the problem throughout the neighbor negotiations. SpongeBob and Gary are a unit. Wherever SpongeBob needs to go, the snail comes with him, and finding accommodation for a snail, even a well-behaved one, adds a logistical complication that neither Patrick nor Squidward is equipped to manage. Gary's presence is not played as a burden by the episode, but it sharpens the difficulty of SpongeBob's situation. He is not just a homeless sponge. He is a homeless sponge with a pet. Living with Squidward requires Squidward to agree to it, which he does not do while conscious. Squidward opens his door mid-sleep, hears some version of SpongeBob explaining the situation, and nods acceptance before returning to bed. SpongeBob and Gary move in. Squidward wakes up properly, processes what is happening, and removes them both. The sequence works because Squidward's hospitality is the product of a mistake rather than a decision, and the episode understands that Squidward's cruelty to SpongeBob is rarely malicious. He is simply a person who values his own space and peace above almost everything else, and SpongeBob is a direct threat to both. Moving back to one's parents after losing a home is the option left when every other door has been tried and closed. SpongeBob packs his bags. Gary packs what he needs. The departure is treated seriously by the episode, not as a joke, but as a genuine next step. The show understood at this early stage that SpongeBob's relationship to Bikini Bottom was the emotional foundation of everything the show did, and leaving Bikini Bottom would be a loss of a different order than losing just the house. The episode needed to bring SpongeBob to the edge of that loss before the resolution could work. Harold and Margaret SquarePants appear for the first time in this episode, which is a production note worth marking. The show had been running for 3 months before SpongeBob's parents appeared on screen, and their debut came in the episode where their son was about to move back in with them. The timing was deliberate. Introducing the parents required a reason for SpongeBob to be going home, and the loss of his house gave the show exactly the motivation it needed. Both Harold and Margaret are established quickly, warm and familiar in the way cartoon parents in this register usually are, which makes SpongeBob's reluctance to return to them more poignant rather than less. Grief in an animated comedy from 1999 is unusual enough to notice when it arrives. SpongeBob's eulogy for his house, delivered to the tiny pebble that is all that remains of the pineapple, is played straight. The episode does not undercut it with a joke. SpongeBob says goodbye to the house in genuine terms, acknowledging what it meant to him, and the scene holds long enough for the feeling to land. This is the earliest example of the show making an emotional commitment to the pineapple as something more than a visual gag. The house was SpongeBob's home, and losing it hurt, and the show respected that enough to let the moment be quiet. Pineapples do not grow from seeds in the way the episode implies. Commercial pineapple cultivation relies almost entirely on vegetative propagation, which means planting a crown cut from a harvested pineapple, a slip from the base of the plant, or a ratoon shoot that grows from the original plant after harvest. These propagation methods produce a new pineapple plant that is genetically identical to the parent and reaches fruiting age substantially faster than a seed-grown plant. Seeds are present in some pineapple varieties, but rare in commercial cultivars, and seed germination produces a much slower developing plant than crown or slip propagation. Growing a pineapple plant from any starting material, including the fastest vegetative methods, takes between 18 and 24 months before it produces its first fruit. During that time, the plant builds its root system, develops its crown of leaves, sends up a flower spike, and finally grows the fruit from the base of that spike over an additional 4 to 6 months. A pineapple does not spring from the ground in a matter of hours, under any biological conditions known to science. 18 to 24 months is also several orders of magnitude away from one night. The pebble that SpongeBob plants and waters produces a full-sized pineapple house, complete with doors, windows, and interior furnishings by the following morning. The episode does not attempt to explain this. It presents the seed, it presents the watering, and it presents the result, and the show's universe accepts all three without offering a mechanism. A pineapple grew overnight, the house is back. SpongeBob has a home. Overnight regrowth of that scale is the episode's commitment to a specific kind of cartoon logic that the show would return to whenever the house was subsequently destroyed. The house always comes back. Whatever happens to it, However completely it is dismantled or consumed or demolished, it returns to its position on Conch Street in the following episode as though nothing occurred. Home Sweet Pineapple established that pattern not as a loophole but as a rule. The house is permanent. The threats to it are temporary. This is part of the show's implicit promise, and the episode made it in its first season, 3 months into the broadcast run. Planting the pebble is Patrick's idea. He finds SpongeBob preparing to leave Bikini Bottom, recognizes that this outcome is worse for everyone than any alternative, and suggests burying the remains of the house. The idea works because Patrick is not stupid in this early episode, in the way the show would later develop his stupidity. Season 1, Patrick has a simpler, more functional kind of naivety, one that occasionally produces the right solution through the wrong reasoning. Burying a pebble expecting a pineapple to grow is wrong as botany. In Bikini Bottom, it is correct. Crushed by the returning pineapple, Squidward receives the episode's final physical punchline. He had been standing where the house was about to land, laughing at SpongeBob's departure, and the house fell on him. This is consistent with how the show operates justice in the neighborhood. Harm done to SpongeBob tends to return to whoever caused it through the most direct available route. Squidward's laughter at SpongeBob's homelessness is answered by the house landing on him, which is also the house restoring itself to its correct position on the street. The two outcomes are the same event. Taken together, what the episode created that August evening in 1999 was not just a story about a house being lost and recovered. It was the first version of the show's answer to the question of what the pineapple actually is. The house is a pineapple full of juice. It can be consumed, it can be reduced to nothing, and when it is gone, it grows back, because Bikini Bottom requires it to be there, and the show requires SpongeBob to live in it, and those two requirements together are more powerful than any nematode with a straw. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The nematodes ate the house, and the house came back within a day. The next major change to the pineapple was slower and stranger, because it did not involve a disaster. It involved SpongeBob deciding, for reasons of his own, that the house needed to be something completely different. Section 3. The House That Changed When He Did Opposite Day is Season 1, Episode 9, which aired September 11, 1999. The episode's premise belongs to Squidward rather than to SpongeBob. A real estate agent is coming to assess properties on Conch Street, and Squidward, desperate not to be saddled with SpongeBob as a permanent neighbor by having someone discover the actual neighborhood they would be moving into, invents a holiday on the spot. Opposite day, he tells SpongeBob, today, everything must be done in reverse. If something would normally be built, it must be destroyed. If someone would normally be cheerful, they must be miserable. The rules are Squidward's rules, invented to serve Squidward's ends. Property values on Conch Street are presumably not helped by the fact that SpongeBob takes Opposite Day completely seriously. He embraces the premise the way he embraces every premise, which is fully and without reservation, and he applies it to his own house. Since he would normally take care of his house, he concludes that on Opposite Day, he must destroy it. The episode shows the destruction as genuine. Walls come down. The structure is dismantled with enthusiasm. The house that regrew from a pebble 3 episodes earlier is demolished by its own resident because a neighbor convinced him that today, everything works backwards. By the logic Squidward applied, this should have served his real estate goals. An unrecognizable and demolished pineapple next door is arguably easier to explain to a buyer than an intact pineapple inhabited by SpongeBob at full volume. But the episode is not interested in that reading. It is interested in the mechanical comedy of Squidward's plan, collapsing under the weight of SpongeBob's sincere interpretation. SpongeBob and Patrick, both believing they should act exactly as Squidward acts on Opposite Day, convince the real estate agent that Squidward himself is the eccentric they should avoid. The plan destroys itself, and Squidward ends up rebuilding SpongeBob's house, specifically because he needs SpongeBob there to ensure the agent does not return. Treating the rules of an invented holiday as binding enough to demolish a house is exactly the kind of logic the show's first season relied on. SpongeBob is not stupid in these early episodes, in the way casual descriptions of the character sometimes suggest. He is extremely literal. He takes the stated terms of any situation at face value and applies them with total consistency. which produces chaos precisely because the people around him expect flexibility he cannot supply. Squidward said everything is opposite today. SpongeBob's house would normally be standing, therefore the house must not stand today. The chain of reasoning is airtight. The conclusion is catastrophic. Damage from opposite day resolved quickly, as it does in Season 1. Squidward rebuilt the house before the episode ended, partly to neutralize his real estate problem, and partly because the show was not yet in the business of carrying consequences past an episode's end. Home Sweet Pineapple had done something unusual by making SpongeBob homeless for most of its runtime. Opposite Day returned to the more conventional model of restoring what was broken before the credits rolled. The house reappeared and the street returned to its normal configuration, and the real estate agent drove away confused. Not Normal is the first segment of the 4th episode of Season 6. It sits roughly a decade into the show's broadcast run, and it covers the most complete and deliberate reimagining of the pineapple the series ever attempted. The premise began with Squidward complaining, which is not unusual, but what Squidward complains about in this episode is different from his typical grievances. He does not want SpongeBob to stop making noise, or to go away. He tells SpongeBob he is simply not normal. In the same declarative way, someone might observe the color of a wall, and then he goes back inside his house. Becoming normal, in the show's terms, is something SpongeBob decides to do the moment the idea is presented to him. There is no period of resistance, no defense of his current way of existing, no argument that his way has value. Squidward says he is not normal. SpongeBob believes him, immediately and completely. He finds a video called How to Be Normal and follows it. Television programs carry a specific authority in the SpongeBob universe. They do not need to be credible or produced by anyone trustworthy. They need only to appear on a screen and address a topic, and they will be acted upon. The How to Be Normal video tells SpongeBob that normal people have no freckles, no holes, no visible differences, no variation from a smooth and average appearance. Normal people go to work, complete their work, and return home to a square blue house with a square green lawn. The video is describing a life the audience can recognize as a specific kind of bland suburban existence, the kind that gets used as a visual shorthand for conformity in American animation and film, and SpongeBob accepts its definitions as authoritative. His new house appears during the episode across a change so gradual that it mirrors SpongeBob's own physical transformation. As his holes fill in, as his freckles fade, as his irregular features smooth into something more generically oval, the pineapple is replaced by the house from the video. It is rectangular and blue, with a green front lawn, a standard pitched roof, and the proportions of a building designed to look exactly like every other building on either side of it. On Conch Street, between a moai and a rock, a subdivision-style suburban house appears, where there had always been a pineapple. The visual clash alone is the episode's most efficient joke, and the episode plays it without underlining it. The house is simply there, looking like a house that wandered in from a different show. White picket fences in American cultural iconography carry a well-established meaning. They are shorthand for an idealized domestic normality that is aspirational in the same way a television advertisement is aspirational, clean, ordered, pleasant, and slightly unreal. The How to Be Normal video explicitly describes the house SpongeBob constructs, which is the show's way of flagging that this particular vision of normality comes pre-packaged from a media source, absorbed and reproduced without modification. SpongeBob does not interpret the video. He enacts it. The house that appears is the house from the video, because SpongeBob is not capable of applying the concept of normal creatively. He can only apply it literally. Architecture as personality is a principle the show committed to from the first episode. The Easter Island head says something about Squidward that a conventional house would not say. The rock says something about Patrick that an apartment building would not say. The pineapple says something about SpongeBob. The blue suburban house says something too, and what it says is that SpongeBob is not there anymore. Not in any meaningful sense. The person who woke up inside that house in the morning and commuted to work and talked about the weather to everyone who passed him was occupying a shape that had been designed to be invisible, to produce no strong reaction in anyone who encountered it, to suggest that the person inside it had no particular edges. Annoyance is Squidward's primary mode of experiencing his neighbor, and the episode takes the unexpected position that normalcy removes that annoyance in a way that turns out to be worse. Squidward had complained about SpongeBob. When SpongeBob becomes normal, Squidward realizes he has lost something that functioned as the main texture of his daily existence. A normal neighbor is a neighbor Squidward has nothing to say about, and for someone whose primary occupation is expressing dissatisfaction, nothing to be dissatisfied about is its own form of misery. The episode is making a quiet argument about the relationship between irritation and identity, suggesting that a Squidward without SpongeBob to complain about is less Squidward, and a SpongeBob who is not irritating is less SpongeBob. Cooking is the first casualty of normalcy that affects the rest of Bikini Bottom. SpongeBob loses his ability to make Krabby Patties. The episode shows him at the Krusty Krab working in a cubicle, producing printed facsimiles of patties rather than cooking them, and the result is a Krabby Patty that has no taste at all. Normal labor produces normal output. The Krabby Patty is not a normal food. It requires a person of abnormal dedication, abnormal enthusiasm, and abnormal relationship to the act of cooking to produce it correctly. SpongeBob's fry cooking is an expression of identity, the same way the pineapple is an expression of identity. When the identity is suppressed, the cooking fails, and when the cooking fails, Mr. Krabs fires him. 3 weeks is the timeline the episode uses to show the transformation completing. 3 weeks of normal behavior, normal appearance, normal commuting, normal house. By the end of that period, SpongeBob is so thoroughly normal that Patrick cannot recognize him. This is the show's clearest statement of what normalcy costs. Patrick recognizes SpongeBob across enormous ranges of disguise and context across the show's full run. He is the constant in SpongeBob's relational world. Losing Patrick's recognition means losing the most fundamental social connection SpongeBob has. Returning to himself requires physical work in the episode, which treats abnormality as something that must be performed repeatedly to become real again. SpongeBob and Patrick do the things SpongeBob normally does, the physical, silly, joyful activities that characterize his regular existence, and each one returns a feature to him, a hole, a freckle, a portion of his natural appearance restored through repeated application of his natural behavior. The episode is literal about this, in the same way SpongeBob is always literal. Identity is not a mental state, it is a practiced set of behaviors, and the house reflects it, and the cooking reflects it, and all of them return together. Seeing Squidward appear in the conventional-looking normal form is the shock that completes the reversal. Squidward, dressed in pants, with a small nose and a round head, looking like a person who might live in the blue suburban house rather than in the Easter Island head, is exactly wrong enough that SpongeBob's system rejects normalcy immediately. If Squidward can be normal, the category has no value. If the person whose entire character is built on elaborate and specific abnormality can dissolve into something generically presentable, then normal is not a superior condition, it is simply a category. SpongeBob returns to his original form, thanks Squidward for making him his true self again, and asks about the weather, which is the kind of conversational gambit a normal person would open with. The show holds that small joke for a beat, then moves on. Porous Pockets addressed a different kind of deliberate transformation, one driven by money rather than identity anxiety. When SpongeBob came into possession of significant wealth, his house changed to reflect that wealth, becoming a mansion on the same lot that had always held the pineapple. The mansion episode demonstrates that the house scales with SpongeBob's circumstances, not just with his personality, and it raises the question of what the pineapple actually is in the show's physical logic. It is not simply a stationary structure. It responds to conditions. Wealth and architecture have a specific relationship in animated series, where a character's home frequently expands when they become rich, and contracts or returns when they become poor, usually within the same episode. The mansion in Porous Pockets follows that template, which the show deployed to explore what happens to SpongeBob's social world when his house stops signaling accessibility. The pineapple, whatever its oddities, is a structure that suggests open doors. A mansion does not. Each deliberate change the show makes to the house across its run is also a temporary change. Opposite Day's demolition was reversed before the credits. Not Normal's blue suburban house was gone when SpongeBob recovered himself. The mansion returned to its pineapple form when the wealth episode resolved. The house never stays changed when the change is intentional, which is the reverse of its behavior when the change is accidental or destructive. Accidental destruction produces the same result, but the route is different. A house eaten by nematodes grows back from a seed. A house deliberately remade into something else simply stops being the different thing when the episode ends. Houses in serialized animation serve two functions simultaneously. They are settings, places where things happen, and they are character statements, visual expressions of the person inside. Most animated shows protect their settings against permanent change because the setting is the audience's stable point of reference. The Krusty Krab is always the Krusty Krab. Patrick's Rock is always Patrick's Rock. SpongeBob's Pineapple is always SpongeBob's Pineapple. Some shows maintain that stability by simply ignoring any threat to it. SpongeBob SquarePants does something more interesting. It allows the threats to be real, allows the house to genuinely change or disappear or be replaced, and then restores the pineapple not through a behind-the-scenes continuity decision, but through the show's internal logic. The pineapple returns, because SpongeBob returns. The two are the same thing, and the show has understood that since the first season. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The house changes when SpongeBob changes, and restores when he does. What the next section covers is the interior of that house, and the rooms that the show added one by one across its run, and what those rooms reveal about how the production understood the space it had given its main character to live in. Section 4. Everything inside the house that shouldn't fit. From the first episode, SpongeBob's house contained more than its exterior dimensions could plausibly hold. Help Wanted opens with a foghorn alarm going off inside the pineapple, SpongeBob waking up, and then doing something no house of that size should accommodate. He dives off a diving board. The board is mounted inside his bedroom, above what appears to be an open area large enough for a controlled dive, and he lands with precision into his waiting SquarePants below. The episode moves on without comment. The diving board is there, the house contains it, and the question of how a short pineapple contains a room tall enough for indoor diving never requires an answer. Help Wanted's opening sequence established the template for how the show would handle interior space for the next 25 years. Show the room, use it, move forward. The pineapple's interior is defined by what SpongeBob needs it to contain at any given moment, and the exterior dimensions are simply not part of that calculation. Diving boards are indoor features common to schools and athletic facilities, not to residential homes of any size. A standard diving platform above a pool requires significant vertical clearance, typically several meters from the board to the water, plus additional clearance above the board for the diver's arc. Inside a pineapple of the dimensions the exterior suggests, this is not available. The exterior of SpongeBob's house is roughly the height and width of a suburban garden shed. The interior, in the pilot episode alone, contains a bedroom with enough vertical clearance for diving, a workout room, and implied additional space. These cannot be simultaneous truths if the building is an actual pineapple. Kitchen furniture throughout the run uses ocean materials in ways that only make sense in an underwater world where surface world furniture is unavailable. The kitchen table is a piece of wood resting on a beach ball, which gives it an unstable quality that the show never addresses because the characters treat it as entirely functional. Chairs are clamshells mounted on bamboo poles on circular bases. The sink is a bucket with a faucet attached. Counter space runs along surfboards, suspended by hula skirts and bamboo posts. The oven is round. The refrigerator is shaped like a submarine, which is a joke about the setting that the show commits to completely. The residents of Bikini Bottom make do with whatever washes down from the surface, and household appliances look like the machines that cross the water above them. Clamshells as chairs are a design choice the show applies consistently through many seasons, creating a kitchen that looks assembled from found materials rather than purchased from a store. This is consistent with the world the show built. Bikini Bottom residents are not ordering furniture from catalogs. They are living inside and around the detritus of the surface world, and their interiors reflect that. Barrels and crates serve as cabinets. A bucket becomes a sink. The combination is charming rather than makeshift because the show presents it without apology, as simply the way things are in a world where the ocean floor is the floor. Round ovens and submarine refrigerators appear consistently enough across seasons to be considered canonical features of the kitchen, even when other details shift. The kitchen has appeared in enough episodes to establish its basic layout with some confidence: the oven and refrigerator against the back wall, the table in the center, the cabinets along the sides. What changes across episodes is the exact positioning of those elements, the presence or absence of specific items, and occasionally the scale of the room itself. The kitchen that can seat SpongeBob and Gary comfortably in a quiet breakfast scene is sometimes the same kitchen that can accommodate multiple visitors, and sometimes it is not. Second-floor rooms were revealed more gradually than the ground floor, because the ground floor was where the show spent most of its time. The kitchen and living room appear earliest and most frequently. The upstairs rooms arrived as the show needed them, which created a situation where the second floor sometimes contained a library, sometimes a bathroom, and sometimes a gallery, depending on which episode was referencing it and whether the storyboard team had checked what a previous episode had placed there. Library occupies the most vertical space of any room in the house, confirmed to span the second and third floors, which means it runs through what the exterior suggests is the pineapple's midsection. A library of this scale, with bookshelves from floor to ceiling across 2 floors, is the kind of room that belongs in an institution rather than in a private residence, which is appropriate for a character who is shown reading everything from novels to comic books to his own work diary. The show gave SpongeBob a library because SpongeBob is the kind of person who would have a library, and the pineapple grew to contain it. Workout rooms in the pineapple appear in episodes that want to make a point about SpongeBob's physical capabilities, which is to say, they appear when the show needs to show him lifting something he cannot lift, or failing at an exercise that he cannot complete. The workout room has a weight set. The weight set consists of stuffed animals on either end of a bar. SpongeBob lifts it with difficulty. This is the same scene from the pilot, and it tells the audience in about 4 seconds what SpongeBob's relationship to physical strength is. The workout room serves its narrative purpose and disappears between appearances. Corners exist where they should not. The exterior of SpongeBob's house is a pineapple, which is a surface composed of curved and angled scales over a roughly cylindrical body. There are no flat interior walls in a cylinder of that kind, and there are no right-angle corners where flat walls would meet. The interior of the house should be curved throughout, matching its outer shape. Instead, the interior rooms have corners. Flat walls meet flat walls at right angles. The rooms are rectangular. They look like rooms in a house rather than rooms inside a fruit, and the show never acknowledges the contradiction, because acknowledging it would require the show to either explain it or abandon it, and neither option serves the story. Geometric logic applied to a round structure would produce curved interior surfaces, reduced usable floor space in the upper portions of the building, and no obvious separation between rooms without internal walls that have no structural support. None of this describes the interior of SpongeBob's pineapple. The interior describes a multi-story house with flat walls, right-angle corners, standard door frames, and rooms that have clear delineations from each other. The show built the interior it needed and gave it a curved exterior, and left the relationship between those two things completely unaddressed. Stairs in the house present a related problem. The staircase connecting the floors appears in many episodes across the show's run, and its position is not consistent. In some episodes, the stairs are on the left side of the house when looking from the front. In others, they are on the right. In some configurations, there appear to be 2 staircases. The wiki notes this explicitly. The staircase sometimes switches sides, and the show's own records acknowledge this as an error that accumulated across the production. A building with a staircase that moves between episodes is a building being assembled anew each time an episode requires it, which is a fair description of how the interior actually functions. Sand as a floor material is the detail that Pineapple Invasion upended in 2016. The floors in SpongeBob's house had appeared to be sand across the show's entire run to that point, which made sense. The house sits on the ocean floor is sand, and sand getting inside the house through a door or a window would naturally accumulate as a floor surface. This reading was consistent and uncontested for 17 seasons. July 14, 2016, is when Pineapple Invasion aired in the United States, and what it revealed beneath the sand floor changed how the entire interior had to be understood. Plankton, searching the house for the Krabby Patty secret formula, tears through the interior looking for hiding places, and during his search the show reveals that the sand on the floor is not sand, it is a carpet, and beneath the carpet is blue metal plating. The pineapple does not sit on the ocean floor, it sits on a metal base. The floor the audience had been watching SpongeBob walk across for 17 seasons was a decorative surface over an engineered structure. Blue metal plating beneath the carpet is the most surprising piece of interior information the show has produced, partly because of what it implies about the house's origin. The episode in which the pineapple fell from a cargo ship showed it landing on the ocean floor and instantly becoming a house. If the house has blue metal plating as a structural floor, that plating was either part of the ship's cargo, installed by SpongeBob at some undocumented point, or present in the pineapple when it fell. The show does not address any of these possibilities. It simply reveals the plating during Plankton's search and moves on. Plankton's search of the house in Pineapple Invasion is one of the most complete interior surveys the show has ever provided, because he tears through rooms looking for hiding places. The episode is the closest thing to a floor-by-floor inventory the show produced in its later seasons, and the secret formula is not in any of the places Plankton searches. It is sitting on top of the television in the living room, which SpongeBob put there when he needed a hiding place and chose the most visible surface in his home. Gary defeats Plankton before he can find it. The episode ends with the formula safe and the interior in disarray. Attic mentions in the series predate any actual on-screen Attic appearance. The episode Squid Baby, from Season 8, contains a reference to an attic in SpongeBob's house without showing it. The attic was later confirmed as a real space in Squidiot Box, which appeared significantly later in the show's run. This pattern of mentioning a room before showing it, or showing a room before mentioning it officially, characterizes the house's relationship to its own layout across the full broadcast run. Rooms exist when they are needed, and their prior existence is assumed rather than established. Walhalla is the name the show gives to the space inside the walls of the pineapple, which is the home of a man named Wally. Wally is described as a crazed, bearded old man who has been living inside the walls for years. The episode that reveals his existence introduces him as an established resident of the house, who has been present through many of the events the audience watched, occupying the space between the interior rooms and the exterior skin of the pineapple. His residence inside the walls requires that the walls of SpongeBob's house be hollow and large enough to contain a living space, which is not consistent with a pineapple, but is consistent with a constructed building that uses wall cavities in the way human buildings do. Feeding Gary across the house's run reveals a placement inconsistency that the show handles by simply putting the food bowl wherever it needs to be. Gary's bowl appears in the kitchen in some episodes, and in SpongeBob's bedroom in others. The bowl is wherever Gary's eating scene requires it to be, which is the interior logic the show applies to nearly everything. The room is defined by the scene, not the other way around. Grassy rooftop access is confirmed across multiple episodes, reached through an escape hatch hidden in the pineapple's leaves. The roof functions as a terrace, with grass growing on it despite being enclosed by the pineapple's crown. The hatch appears in Jellyfish Jam, Something Smells, That Sinking Feeling, Love That Squid, and Gary's New Toy, confirming it as a recurring feature rather than a one-off set piece. A grassy terrace, accessible through a hatch in a pineapple's leaves, is not architecturally plausible, and is exactly the kind of feature the house contains without explanation. Garage placement at the back of the house is established in Reef Blower, the short that aired alongside Help Wanted in the original pilot broadcast. Reef Blower is a wordless episode in which SpongeBob uses a leaf blower-style machine to clear sand from his yard, accidentally flooding Squidward's yard in the process. The episode's opening shots establish the back of the house for the first time, showing the garage where the reef blower is stored. This was the second thing the audience ever learned about the house, directly after its existence, and it came in a short with no dialogue. Vhart, a mathematics education YouTuber, posted a video on January 24, 2012, that analyzed SpongeBob's house design and identified a specific geometric inconsistency in how the exterior pineapple was drawn. The video accumulated significant viewership and reached the SpongeBob production team. Kenny Pittenger, a designer on the show, responded by making a slight adjustment to the house's design following the video's observations. This is the only documented case of an outside party directly influencing the physical design of the pineapple. The correction was minor, a small adjustment to the proportions rather than a complete redesign, but it is a notable moment in the house's timeline. A YouTube mathematics video changed the look of the building. Inconsistencies in the interior across the show's run are not design failures in the conventional sense. They are the accumulated result of a production that made episodes one at a time across 2 decades, with different storyboard artists working on different episodes, each of whom needed a version of the interior that served the story they were telling. The staircase moved because different storyboarders put it where they needed it. Rooms appeared and disappeared because a room was required for one episode and not referenced in another. The sand floor was never questioned because it was a reasonable assumption, until the episode that decided to look beneath it. All of it together describes a house that is, in practical production terms, whatever the episode requires it to be. The constraints on the interior are not architectural, they are narrative. If SpongeBob needs a diving board, the bedroom has vertical clearance for one. If Plankton needs to search multiple rooms, there are multiple rooms to search. If a room must contain a library that spans 2 floors, the pineapple contains 2 floors worth of library. The exterior remains a pineapple. The interior remains whatever the show needs. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The interior grew around what SpongeBob needed it to hold. What the next section covers is the address itself, and the street it sits on, and the neighborhood the show built around the pineapple over 25 seasons, and the real place in the Pacific Ocean that the show drew all of it from. Section 5. The street, the neighbors, and the real place under the sea. Conch Street takes its name from the conch shell, which is among the most recognized seashell forms in the world. Queen conch and related species produce large spiral shells with a distinctive pink interior, and they have been used as instruments, tools, and decorative objects across the Pacific and Caribbean for thousands of years. The shells wash up on beaches and accumulate in shallow coastal waters throughout the tropical Pacific, which is exactly the kind of environment the show drew its visual vocabulary from. Naming the central residential street after a shell found in tropical Pacific waters is consistent with every other naming decision the show made. The street sounds like the ocean, because everything in Bikini Bottom sounds like the ocean. Addresses in an underwater city raise questions that the show never engages with, namely who administers a postal system in a place where no government is shown to be in charge of civic infrastructure. The address 124 Conch Street is confirmed across multiple episodes, and the post office recognizes it well enough to deliver mail to it. SpongeBob receives letters. Bills arrive. A functioning postal infrastructure is assumed to exist without any episode spending time on how it operates. This is the approach the show takes to all civic functions in Bikini Bottom. Things work because characters need them to work, and the show does not backtrack to explain how. Next door to the pineapple on the left stands the house belonging to Squidward Quincy Tentacles, and it is not a house in any conventional sense. It is a moai, a full-scale Easter Island head, the kind of stone statue associated globally with the remote island in the southeastern Pacific, sits on Conch Street between SpongeBob's pineapple and the street beyond, with windows in the eye cavities and a functional interior. Squidward lives inside the face of a stone ancestor figure. The show establishes this in the pilot and never comments on it again. Moai are the massive stone sculptures carved by the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island between approximately the 13th and 16th centuries. About 1,000 of them are known to exist across the island, ranging from a little over a meter to more than 10 meters tall, with one unfinished moai in a quarry reaching almost 22 meters. They were carved primarily from compressed volcanic ash called tuff, which is softer than granite and can be worked with stone tools. The moai represent ancestors, specifically deceased individuals of high status or chiefs, and they were placed on ceremonial stone platforms called ahu, facing inward toward the communities they were meant to watch over. They face the village, which means their backs are to the sea. Easter Island, known in the indigenous language as Rapa Nui, sits in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, roughly 3,700 kilometers off the coast of Chile, which administers it as a special territory. It is one of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth. The Rapa Nui people who built the moai had no contact with mainland South America or with Polynesia once they arrived on the island, and the civilization they developed, including the construction and transportation of hundreds of enormous stone figures, was entirely self-contained. The moai have fascinated the outside world since European contact in 1722, and their image has spread across global popular culture to the point where a stylized stone head is among the most immediately recognizable visual forms associated with the Pacific. Building Squidward's character into the shape of his house works in the same way as building SpongeBob's character into the shape of his. Squidward is ancient in his sensibilities. He plays classical music on an instrument that predates recorded history. He paints in a style that places him in a tradition of European art that is centuries old. He believes himself to be a misunderstood genius in a neighborhood of people who cannot appreciate what he has to offer. Putting him inside a stone head associated with a civilization that built its monuments to revere important ancestors is not a random aesthetic choice. Squidward is, in his own estimation, exactly the kind of figure who should be commemorated in stone. The irony is that he lives in the commemorative form rather than being commemorated by it. Underground beneath Patrick Starr's rock, the show's third major Conch Street residence operates on an entirely different logic from its neighbors. Patrick lives under a rock. The exterior is a rock. The interior, when shown, is a space roughly consistent with a low-ceilinged room beneath a boulder, furnished with essentially nothing. There is a television, there is a bed, there is not much else, and the absence of much else is the point. Rock as a structure for habitation is not a purely fictional concept. Many ancient human societies built homes into cave systems or under rock overhangs, using the thermal mass of stone for insulation and the shelter of an overhang for protection from weather. Patrick's rock, while not a cave, performs a similar function in the show's visual logic. It is the most minimal possible shelter for a creature that requires minimal shelter. Patrick does not cook, does not read, does not pursue hobbies in any organized way, and does not have guests who require furniture. His house contains exactly what he uses, which is not much, and the rock reflects his lifestyle as precisely as the pineapple reflects SpongeBob's. Marshall Islands is the real location that gives the show its setting. Bikini Atoll sits in the Relique chain of the Marshall Islands, in the central Pacific Ocean, roughly 225 miles northwest of Kwajalein Atoll. It is a ring of approximately 20 small coral islands surrounding an oval lagoon about 25 miles long and 15 miles wide. The total dry land area of the atoll is barely more than 2 square miles. Before 1946, about 167 Marshallese people called it home, sustaining themselves through fishing and farming in what the show's own framing echoes as a remote Pacific island paradise. Nuclear testing changed all of that. In February of 1946, Navy Commodore Ben H. Wyatt arrived on Bikini Atoll and asked the Bikinian people to leave their home temporarily for what he described as the good of mankind. The United States government had identified the atoll as the most suitable available location for testing nuclear weapons, citing its distance from shipping lanes and the absence of regular air traffic. The 167 residents agreed, trusting the promise that they would be allowed to return once the tests were complete. They were relocated to Rongerik Atoll, approximately 140 miles away, and the testing began. Operation Crossroads was the first series of tests, conducted in the summer of 1946. The Able test on July 1, 1946, dropped a plutonium bomb over the atoll's lagoon, where dozens of decommissioned naval vessels had been anchored as targets. A second test, Baker, followed 3 weeks later, detonating a nuclear weapon below the surface of the lagoon. The resulting underwater explosion sent a column of radioactive water and steam into the air, and irradiated the surrounding ships so thoroughly that most were eventually sunk rather than decontaminated. Between 1946 and 1958, 23 nuclear devices were detonated at Bikini Atoll, including the first hydrogen bomb tested by the United States in 1952. Fallout from the Castle Bravo test in 1954 was particularly severe. The bomb's yield was roughly 2.5 times what had been predicted, releasing energy equivalent to approximately 15 megatons of TNT, or about 7,000 times the force of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The radioactive fallout traveled approximately 125 miles east of the atoll, contaminating Rongelap and other atolls in the Marshall Islands, and exposing their populations to significant radiation doses. The total contaminated area was far larger than the test designers had planned. Relocation of the Bikinian people did not end at Rongerik. Near starvation conditions there led to a transfer to Kwajalein Atoll, where the Bikinians were housed in tents beside a United States military runway. In 1948, they were moved to Kili Island, a small, isolated 200-acre island approximately 425 miles south of Bikini, which lacked the sheltered lagoon that Bikinian fishing practices required. Some Bikini Islanders attempted to return to their home atoll in the late 1960s after the United States declared the atoll safe, but food sources, particularly coconuts grown in the contaminated soil, were found to be carrying dangerously high radiation levels, and the Bikinians were evacuated again in 1978. Bikini Atoll has remained uninhabitable since. UNESCO's World Heritage Site designation arrived in 2010, recognizing the atoll as a site of outstanding universal value, representing the dawn of the nuclear age and its consequences. The designation notes both the tangible evidence of the tests, including the Bravo crater and the sunken ships in the lagoon, and the broader historical significance of what happened there. The lagoon is now a dive site, and marine life has recovered substantially in the absence of human activity, creating what UNESCO's documentation describes as an accidental ecological refuge in water that remains contaminated. Placing an animated children's comedy directly below the most heavily irradiated and forcibly depopulated atoll in the Pacific is a choice that Hillenburg has never explained at length, and that the show has never acknowledged within its own episodes. The casual and cheerful tone of Bikini Bottom does not interact with the history of the place above it. The Pineapple House sits on the ocean floor beneath Bikini Atoll, and the nuclear tests that define that atoll's global identity are not present in the show in any form. The History Channel has run pieces connecting the show to Bikini Atoll, and the connection is universally noted in journalism about the show's premise. Inside the show itself, it simply does not exist. French narration opens every episode of SpongeBob's SquarePants, in the distinctive voice of Tom Kenny, performing an accent that signals ocean documentary immediately to anyone who has watched one. The narrator describes Bikini Bottom in the mock-serious style of a nature film, and the effect is that the show positions itself as a naturalistic observation of underwater life, while simultaneously being as far from naturalistic observation as a cartoon can be. The joke runs throughout the show's opening, and it lands because everyone watching understands the reference. Jacques Cousteau made underwater environments legible to audiences who had never seen them through his ship Calypso, his inventions including the aqualung, and his decades of documentary filmmaking. His narrated expeditions were among the most influential pieces of ocean media produced in the 20th century, and his voice and presentation style became the default template for underwater documentary narration across multiple generations of filmmakers. A French narrator describing ocean life is a direct reference to that tradition, and Hillenburg, who spent years teaching marine science to visitors at the Ocean Institute, was immersed in exactly that lineage. Hillenburg drew on his scientific background throughout the show in ways that do not always announce themselves. Sandy Cheeks, who appears in the third episode of the series, is a Texas squirrel living in an air-filled transparent dome on the ocean floor, conducting scientific research. Her existence in Bikini Bottom requires a technology that allows an air-breathing mammal to survive underwater, and the show provides it in the form of her tree dome, without explaining how she pressurizes it or what her long-term oxygen source is. Sandy is the show's representative of the surface world living below it, and she is also its most explicitly scientific character. She runs experiments, she builds things, she understands the environment around her in ways the other residents do not. Geography within Bikini Bottom is inconsistent in the same way the interior of the pineapple is inconsistent. The Krusty Krab is sometimes describable as a short walk from Conch Street, and sometimes requires what appears to be a longer journey. Mrs. Puff's boating school is nearby in some episodes, and at a significant distance in others. Glove World, a recurring amusement park, moves in and out of the neighborhood depending on what an episode needs. The show treats Bikini Bottom's geography as it treats the pineapple's interior, defined by narrative requirement, not by fixed measurement. Krusty Krab proximity to the pineapple is the most frequently relevant geographic question because SpongeBob commutes to work in almost every episode. The show's official position is that the Krusty Krab is close enough to Conch Street to reach on foot without significant effort, which is consistent with the opening sequence of Help Wanted, where SpongeBob runs there from his house in a short sequence. Later episodes complicate this by showing SpongeBob traveling in a boat or being caught in situations that suggest the restaurant is further away than the pilot implied. The show never resolves the distance because resolving it would require measuring things, and measuring things would create constraints the writers do not want. Sandy Cheek's Tree Dome completes the neighborhood as a collection of miniature worlds, each sealed from the environment around it in some way. The pineapple is a closed fruit with an interior that does not connect to the ocean directly. The Easter Island head is a solid stone structure. The rock is a rock. The tree dome is a transparent air-filled sphere on the ocean floor, maintaining a completely different atmosphere from everything outside it. Each structure in the Bikini Bottom residential neighborhood is its own sealed system, which is consistent with the show's implicit approach to community. These characters live near each other without being continuous with each other, separated by their individual enclosures. Community assembled on that street is therefore a community of separate enclosures that share proximity without sharing space. SpongeBob can visit Squidward only by going outside and knocking on Squidward's door. Patrick emerges from under his rock to stand on the same street SpongeBob runs along. Sandy's Tree Dome requires visitors to put on water-filled helmets before entering, and requires Sandy herself to wear a suit when she leaves. Nobody in the neighborhood exists in a continuous shared environment. Everyone lives in their own sealed container, and the interaction between them is the act of moving from one container to another, which is what every episode on Conch Street is about. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The neighborhood has been the same 3 houses since 1999, but the house itself has not been the same across that time. What the next section covers is the specific ways the animation of the pineapple changed across the show's seasons, and the moment one YouTuber's geometry video caused a production team to redraw a building that had been on air for 12 years. Section 6. How the pineapple changed and the math that forced a redesign. Season 1's pineapple is not quite the same pineapple that appears in Season 10, and neither of them is the pineapple that appeared in the original pilot recording made in 1997. The house has been recognizable at every stage of the show's 25-year run, but recognizable is not the same as identical, and tracing the evolution of the building across decades of production reveals a series of quiet adjustments, some intentional, and some the byproduct of changing technology, and one very loud correction that happened because a mathematician on YouTube spent 12 minutes proving that the building was geometrically impossible. Pilot design differences from the broadcast series begin with the window count. In Help Wanted, the house has one window visible on the front elevation. From the second episode onward, the house almost always has multiple windows. This change was made between the 1997 recording and the regular series production in 1999, and was one of the cleaner design decisions the team made during the transition from pilot to ongoing show. One window communicates a smaller, simpler space. Multiple windows communicate a larger structure with distinct rooms, which is more consistent with what the interior eventually revealed itself to contain. Single window appearances occur in later episodes as well, but those are treated as errors rather than intentional design choices. The wiki notes that the Season 16 premiere, Life Insurance, and another episode, Plain to See, both show SpongeBob's house with only one window in the front. These are continuity lapses rather than design decisions, which is the distinction the production has never been particularly careful about maintaining across 2.5 decades of broadcast. Production of an animated series across multiple seasons involves dozens of people working on different episodes with different lead times, often without comprehensive reference sheets that every artist checks before drawing a background. SpongeBob SquarePants was produced across a period that included major transitions in animation technology, changes in showrunner, and expansions of the production team that brought new artists onto backgrounds they had never drawn before. In that context, the number of windows on the front of the house being wrong in a given episode is not surprising. What is surprising is how rarely it happened. Colors in the original seasons sit warmer and slightly more orange than the version of the house audiences see in later years. The first 3 seasons, produced before the 2004 movie and before the shift in showrunning that accompanied it, have a visual quality that fans and critics consistently describe as warmer, hand-drawn, and more textured than what came after. The line work in those early episodes is rougher and has a quality that reflects the physical process of drawing on paper, which was the dominant production method before digital tools became standard across the industry. The pineapple in those seasons has a weight to it that is slightly different from the cleaner, more digitally produced version that appears in later episodes. Golden Era designation is what the SpongeBob fandom applies to seasons 1 through 3, corresponding to the show's first 3 years on air and broadly to the period during which Hillenburg was the most directly involved in its day-to-day production. The visual style of the house in those seasons has become the reference point most associated with the show's identity. Merchandise, promotional materials, and anniversary content consistently return to a version of the pineapple that resembles the Season 1 design more than any later iteration, which says something about which version of the house audiences consider canonical. Line work quality and animation changed across the industry between 1999 and 2010, and SpongeBob changed with it. The shift from hand-drawn cells to digital ink and paint processes, which occurred across most of American animation in the early 2000s, produced a cleaner line and a more consistent color fill, at the cost of the slightly irregular tactile quality that physical drawing produces. The pineapple in Season 4 looks more polished than the pineapple in Season 1, partly because it is more polished, in the technical sense that more tools were available to ensure consistency, and partly because the people drawing it were operating in a different production environment. Post-Hillenburg production changes are the most frequently discussed among fans of the original seasons. Hillenburg stepped back from day-to-day showrunning after the 2004 movie, with Paul Tibbitt taking over the creative lead for seasons 4 through 8. The visual changes in those seasons are not dramatic at the level of the exterior pineapple design, which remains broadly consistent, but they are detectable in the line quality, the color palette, and the way backgrounds are constructed. The house under Tibbitt's tenure does not look wrong, but it looks slightly different from what came before, and the fans who noticed tracked that difference episode by episode. First theatrical SpongeBob movie arrived November 19, 2004, and the pineapple appeared in it with a slightly more refined design suited to a larger screen. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie was animated with theatrical release in mind, which meant the character designs and backgrounds were produced to a standard intended to hold up at cinema scale rather than standard definition television. The result is a version of the house that has slightly cleaner proportions and a more deliberate surface detail, without departing significantly from the established design. The movie's pineapple would be recognizable to anyone familiar with the television version. HD broadcasting changed the demands placed on animated backgrounds beginning in the mid-2000s. When Nickelodeon moved to producing SpongeBob in high definition for Season 6 onwards, every background in the show suddenly existed at a resolution that exposed details that standard definition had obscured. Lines that had been soft enough at lower resolution became visible in ways that required adjustment. Colors that had been sufficient at small screen sizes had to be reconsidered for larger displays. The pineapple redesign that followed HD production was not dramatic, but the increased resolution meant that the details of the exterior surface were now visible at a quality that invited scrutiny. January 24, 2012, is when Vi Hart posted a video to YouTube titled Open Letter to Nickelodeon, SpongeBob's Pineapple Under the Sea. Hart is a mathematician and educator known for producing rapid, illustrated explanations of mathematical concepts aimed at general audiences. The SpongeBob video arrived 3 days after she had completed a 3-part series on the mathematics of spirals, Fibonacci sequences, and the way plants grow, which gave her the specific vocabulary and the demonstrated examples needed to make her argument about the pineapple. Hart's video argued that SpongeBob's house was geometrically impossible, on the specific grounds that it did not follow the mathematical pattern that real pineapples follow. She presented diagrams, used an actual pineapple as a physical reference, and walked through the spiral counting process that demonstrates the problem. The video accumulated significant views quickly and was covered by the Huffington Post and other entertainment press, which is how it reached the SpongeBob production team. Fibonacci sequences in nature occur when consecutive terms in the sequence 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34 appear in the physical structures of living things. The sequence is generated by adding the two preceding numbers to get the next one, and it appears with remarkable frequency in botanical contexts. Sunflower seed heads, pine cones, artichokes, and pineapples all exhibit spiral arrangements whose counts are consecutive Fibonacci numbers. In a pineapple, counting the spirals of fruitlets going in one direction typically produces 8, and counting the spirals going in the other direction typically produces 13. 8 and 13 are consecutive terms in the Fibonacci sequence. Phyllotaxis is the branch of botany that studies the spatial arrangement of leaves, seeds, florets, and other repeated elements in plants, and it has documented the Fibonacci sequence's appearance in plant growth patterns across hundreds of species. The reason for the pattern is mathematical rather than mystical. It arises from the way plants add new elements at a specific angle relative to the previous one, and the angle that produces the most efficient packing of seeds or florets happens to produce Fibonacci counts when the spirals are tallied. Real pineapples are real pineapples. Their spiral counts reflect the biological process that grew them. Kenny Pittenger worked as a background designer on SpongeBob's SquarePants, and the pineapple was one of the backgrounds he had drawn. When Hart's video reached him, he responded on his personal blog the following day with a line that immediately circulated across animation and mathematics communities online. His opening was approximately this: "The jig is up, and he was tired of living a lie." The response combined humor about having been called out with genuine acknowledgement that Hart's geometric analysis was correct. He then posted a redesigned version of the pineapple exterior, with the spiral pattern corrected to match the Fibonacci-based arrangement found in real pineapples. Redesigning an established animated character's house in response to a YouTube video about mathematics is not a common occurrence in the history of television production. The documented instances of external criticism directly producing a design change in an ongoing animated series are rare, and most of them involve character design rather than background architecture. Pittenger's response was rapid and public, and the corrected pineapple design was subsequently incorporated into the show's production. The version of the house that appears in episodes from approximately 2012 onward has a spiral fruitlet pattern consistent with what real pineapples display. Changed exterior pattern is the most visible result of the Hart correction, though it is not a change most viewers would notice without being told to look. The fruitlet scales on the exterior of the pineapple now follow a pattern that spirals in Fibonacci-correct proportions rather than in the slightly off arrangement that had been used since 1997. The house is still gold, still pineapple-shaped, still positioned the same way on Conch Street. What is different is the mathematical accuracy of the surface texture, and the difference is invisible to anyone not counting spirals. CGI made its first significant appearance in the pineapple's history in the 2015 film The SpongeBob Movie, Sponge Out of Water, directed by Paul Tibbitt. The film combined the show's traditional 2D animation with computer-generated sequences in which the characters and environments appeared in 3 dimensions. The premise involved SpongeBob and his friends leaving the ocean and entering the surface world, and the surface world was rendered in CGI while Bikini Bottom remained in 2D. The pineapple house is not a central element of the 2015 film's CGI sequences, but the film's approach to mixing animation styles established the visual grammar that the franchise would use in its next major production. Sponge Out of Water was a critical and commercial success, earning over $300 million at the global box office against a $74 million production budget. The film's success gave Nickelodeon confidence in a full CGI SpongeBob feature, which arrived 5 years later as the SpongeBob Movie, Sponge on the Run, originally planned for theatrical release and ultimately premiering on Paramount Plus in North America on March 4, 2021, after theaters closed due to the pandemic. Full computer animation in Sponge on the Run presented the Pineapple House in 3 dimensions for the first time, as the primary visual mode, rather than as a supplementary one. The CGI pineapple maintains the basic proportions of the 2D version: the leaves at the top, the door, the multiple windows, the garage at the back, while adding the kind of surface detail and lighting that only 3-dimensional rendering provides. Fruitlet scales catch light differently from different angles. The leaves move with a weight that 2D cannot fully replicate. The house is recognizable as the same building that appeared in Help Wanted in 1999, rendered in a technology that did not exist in consumer-accessible form when the show premiered. Spin-off series that followed the main show's later seasons introduced their own visual variations on the pineapple. Camp Coral, SpongeBob's Underyears, which premiered on Paramount Plus in March 2021, is set during SpongeBob's childhood and does not feature the pineapple at 124 Conch Street because SpongeBob is not yet living there. The series depicts him at summer camp, and the visual style is CGI throughout. The design decisions made for the spin-offs are visually continuous with the Sponge on the Run approach rather than with the original 2D series. Late-era visual design, meaning the show's appearances from roughly season 10 onward, under different showrunners following Hillenburg's death in November 2018, has involved a conscious effort to return to visual elements associated with the original seasons. The house in those episodes has proportions and surface detail closer to the early seasons than to the mid-run digital version. This return is documented in interviews with the production team and visible in comparison with seasons 6 through 8 episodes. The pineapple oscillates, across the show's run, between the specificity of its original hand-drawn appearance and the cleanliness of its digital-era version. Visual stability of the pineapple across all of these changes is more remarkable than the changes themselves. The building has been drawn by hundreds of different artists across 25 years. It has been produced in standard definition and high definition, in 2D and CGI, with one window and with several, with a Fibonacci incorrect spiral pattern and a corrected one. Through all of it, it remains immediately recognizable as SpongeBob's house. The relationship between the shape, the color, the proportions, and the roof of leaves is deeply enough established in the audience's visual memory that relatively small changes to any individual element do not disrupt recognition. Pattern recognition is the cognitive process that makes an icon an icon. Once an image has been absorbed into visual memory, it can be reproduced with significant variation and still be recognized, because the brain is matching against a stored template rather than against a precise specification. SpongeBob's house became an icon early in its broadcast life, and it has remained one through every design change the production has made. The Fibonacci correction did not make it more or less recognizable. The HD transition did not make it more or less recognizable. The shift to CGI did not make it more or less recognizable. The house is the house, regardless of what geometry it follows, because the audience decided it was the house a very long time ago. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The design has changed, and the house has been recognized through all of it. What the next section covers is the comprehensive list of every time the house was damaged, destroyed, or fundamentally altered across the show's run, and what that list says about how frequently the production put the pineapple in danger. Section 7. Every time the house was destroyed, and why it never stayed that way. Counting the documented instances of significant damage to SpongeBob's Pineapple House across the show's full run produces a list that is both longer and more varied than most viewers would estimate from memory. The house has been consumed by parasites, frozen solid, eaten by a giant worm, thrown into the air by oversized visitors, condemned by the health department, seized as an animal sanctuary, and pushed off a cliff by a neighbor with access to a bulldozer. Each of these episodes ends the same way. The house is there at the start of the following episode, intact and in its usual position on Conch Street, and the destruction is not referenced again. Freezing as a category of house damage arrives in Suds, the 15th episode of Season 1, which aired January 17, 2000. The episode's primary story is about SpongeBob getting sick with the suds, a condition that causes soap bubbles to emerge from his body's pores. Before any of that begins, SpongeBob is shown getting up in the middle of the night and opening his refrigerator. He stands in front of the open refrigerator until he falls asleep standing up. He is still there the following morning, still asleep, still holding the door open, and the temperature inside the house has dropped to the point where everything is frozen solid. When SpongeBob falls ill in Suds, the freezing is presented as already complete by the time the episode's main plot begins. The house is encased in ice, the furniture is frozen, Gary is frozen, SpongeBob himself is frozen, but functional enough to move, because the episode needs him to travel to get help. The house thaws off screen, and is restored by the next appearance. Nothing about the freezing sequence advances any story. It simply establishes that SpongeBob's habits left unchecked can produce an iced interior, which is the kind of realistic consequence the show occasionally gestures toward before ignoring. Cold temperatures and organic material interact in ways that are worth considering for a house made of tropical fruit. Pineapple flesh freezes at approximately -1 degree Celsius, which is close to the freezing point of water. Freezing and thawing organic tissue damages cell walls, which is why frozen fruit has a mushy texture when defrosted, rather than the firm texture of the fresh fruit. A pineapple that froze solid and then thawed would be structurally compromised, with softened exterior skin, ruptured internal cells, and a significantly reduced ability to maintain the rigid shape the house requires. The show's house emerges from its freezing episode without any of these consequences. Worm damage arrived in Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm, Season 3, Episode 12. The episode's premise involves an Alaskan bullworm that has been destroying things across Bikini Bottom, including, at some point during the episode, part of SpongeBob's house. The damage is repaired quickly within the episode's timeline. Later, the worm falls onto Bikini Bottom after being lured to the edge of a cliff, and sources note that the house may have been crushed or damaged in the impact, though the episode's ending focuses elsewhere. The worm attack is one of several instances where the house sustains partial damage that the show does not linger on, treating it as a scene detail rather than a plot point. Alaskan bullworms are not real animals. The worm in the episode is enormous, large enough to swallow Sandy and cause widespread destruction, and its name is the show's invention. Real bull sharks are real animals and are aggressive, but there is no marine worm of that size or behavior. The episode uses the worm in the way animated shows use large animal threats, as a source of chaos and comedic destruction that allows the neighborhood to be damaged at scale without requiring anyone to be held responsible. Nobody built the worm, nobody sent it. It arrived, ate things, and was eventually dealt with. Sam Starr's appearance in the Season 8 episode Big Sister Sam introduced Patrick's sister as a character who combines good intentions with catastrophic physical impact. Sam is significantly larger than any other character on the show, and her affection for Patrick expresses itself in ways that the surrounding neighborhood cannot absorb. Both SpongeBob's house and Squidward's house are damaged, and ultimately thrown into the air during her visit, breaking apart on impact with the ground. The destruction is presented without malice on Sam's part, which is the show's consistent approach to Patrick's sister. She is not trying to destroy the neighborhood. She simply does. Throwing a structure into the air requires a level of force that the show never tries to account for physically. Sam lifts the pineapple in Big Sister Sam as though it weighs nothing, which is consistent with her characterization as someone whose strength operates outside the show's normal physical register. A real pineapple large enough to function as a house would weigh many tons if its interior dimensions matched what the show depicts. The force required to lift it and throw it would be significant. None of this is the show's concern. Sam throws the house goes up, the house comes down in pieces. Physical forces outside SpongeBob's control also account for the monster-based destruction in The Monster Who Came to Bikini Bottom, another Season 8 episode in which a massive creature visits the neighborhood and causes structural damage before being befriended and eventually leaving. The house is thrown into the air in a manner similar to the Sam Starr episode, and the breaking apart on landing detail recurs. The show had apparently found a reliable visual beat in the image of a pineapple shattering on impact, because it deployed it more than once. Decay is the category Home Sweet Rubble explores, and it is the most biologically plausible form of house damage in the show's run. The episode, which appears at position 170 in the episode numbering according to fan records, and falls in the later portion of the Season 8 production period, shows the pineapple house in a state of genuine physical deterioration, wilting and breaking down in the way a real fruit eventually does. SpongeBob's friends gather to help him rebuild and repair it, treating the decay as a problem with a practical solution. The episode is the closest the show has come to acknowledging that a fruit-based residence has a natural lifespan. Friends arrive to help in that episode, which is one of the few instances where the restoration of the house requires effort from multiple characters rather than simply resolving between episodes. The rebuilding sequence places Patrick, Sandy, and Squidward in the role of restorers, each contributing to the physical work of putting the house back together. The result is the same pineapple in the same location, restored to its standard appearance, as though the decay had not occurred. But the episode takes the time to show the work, which distinguishes it from the episodes where the house simply returns to normal without any depicted effort. Neighbor-driven destruction has its own entry in the house's timeline that reflects poorly on Squidward in a specific and documented way. New Fish in Town, episode 151, in the numbering system used by SpongeBob fan sites and paired with Love That Squid, shows Squidward using a bulldozer to push SpongeBob's house off a cliff. The episode involves a new fish moving into the neighborhood, whom Squidward believes to be a kindred spirit and potential friend, leading him to try to reshape the neighborhood in ways that reflect his own preferences. Removing SpongeBob's house with heavy machinery is Squidward's most directly hostile act against the pineapple across the show's full run. Bulldozers used as neighborhood weapons represent a qualitatively different category of house damage from the others. The nematodes were a natural phenomenon. Sam Starr was expressing affection badly. The worm was a wild animal. Squidward obtained access to construction equipment and made a deliberate choice to use it on his neighbor's house. The episode treats this choice as within the range of Squidward's behavior, which is consistent with how the show has always depicted his relationship to the pineapple. He does not like the house. He has never liked the house. He has spent 25 seasons wishing it were somewhere else, and in New Fish in Town, he briefly succeeded in making that wish real. Condemnation by the health department is the most legally grounded form of displacement SpongeBob's house has experienced. Sentimental Sponge, which aired April 3, 2011, as the second episode of Season 9, follows SpongeBob as he develops an inability to throw anything away because of the memories attached to his possessions. The house accumulates so much material that it eventually becomes a public health concern. The show depicts a health inspector arriving and condemning the property, which is the legal process by which a building is declared unfit for occupation and its resident is required to vacate. SpongeBob has to clear the house before he can return. Sentimental Sponge engages with hoarding as a behavioral pattern in a way that is more medically grounded than most animated shows would attempt. Compulsive hoarding is recognized as a genuine condition, characterized by difficulty discarding possessions regardless of their actual value and by the distress that the prospect of discarding them causes. The episode plays the behavior for comedy, but does not mock SpongeBob for it. The diagnosis implicit in his inability to throw things away is presented as a response to a real emotional attachment to his experiences, which is more sympathetic than the condemnation framing might suggest. He gets to keep his memories. He just has to clean the house. Sanctuary placed a different kind of legal claim on the pineapple in an episode of the same name that aired October 2, 2015. SpongeBob begins taking in stray snails that appear in Bikini Bottom, motivated by his affection for Gary and by the general impulse toward care that characterizes him. The snails multiply. The house fills with them. The situation eventually reaches a point where SpongeBob has taken in more snails than the space can functionally hold, and the legal designation of the house as an animal sanctuary removes his ability to enter it on his own terms. He is displaced from his own home by the logical conclusion of his own generosity. Snails accumulating in a domestic space have obvious practical consequences. A single snail produces mucus and requires feeding. Multiple snails require significantly more care, more space, and more resources. The episode reaches a comic extreme, but the underlying premise that a person can lose access to their own home through the accumulation of animals is grounded in real situations. Animal hoarding and the legal interventions it triggers are documented, and the show's version of that situation is compressed into 11 minutes, but follows the same basic logic. Too many snails, too little space, legal consequence. Unreal Estate is Season 10, Episode 2, which aired June 3, 2017, and it represents the most unusual category of house displacement the show produced: psychological manipulation. The episode's premise is that Squidward wants SpongeBob to leave Conch Street, and his method is to put black pepper on SpongeBob's house, which causes SpongeBob to sneeze when he approaches it. SpongeBob concludes that he is allergic to his own home. This belief is then used to send him on a series of house-hunting visits, while Squidward tries to find him a permanent replacement. SpongeBob is not displaced by destruction or legal action. He is displaced by a lie about his own body's response to the building. Psychological displacement differs from physical destruction in what it reveals about the character's relationship to the house. SpongeBob can lose the house to forces outside himself and grieve it appropriately. Being convinced that his own body rejects it is a different kind of loss, one that attacks the relationship between him and the pineapple at the most fundamental level. If he is allergic to it, the house is not his refuge, it is a threat. The episode resolves when the deception is discovered and SpongeBob returns, which restores the relationship by restoring the truth about what the building is. Storm damage hit the house in Mermaid Man Begins, a Season 8 or early Season 9 episode that traces the origin story of Bikini Bottom's fictional superhero duo. Sources note that the house is dismantled by a storm in that episode, which places natural weather among the categories of threat the pineapple has faced. A storm capable of dismantling a pineapple house would need to generate significant wind and wave forces, which at the depth Bikini Bottom is presumed to occupy would require unusual seismic or tidal conditions. The show presents the storm and moves on. The house is restored by the following appearance. Mermaid Man Begins is not primarily a house episode, and the storm damage is a background element of a larger story about superhero origins rather than the episode's focus. This is true of several entries on the destruction list. The house sustains damage as a consequence of something else happening in the episode, rather than the damage being the episode's subject. The nematode episode and Home Sweet Rubble are unusual in making the house's condition the central premise. Most of the other destructions are peripheral, happening in service of a different story. Tabulating the verified destructions across the show's run, and excluding the deliberate changes SpongeBob made to the house, produces the following count: 1 instance of liquid consumption, 1 instance of freezing, 1 instance of partial worm consumption, 2 instances of the house being physically thrown and broken, 1 instance of neighbor-operated heavy machinery, 1 instance of health department condemnation, 1 instance of animal sanctuary legal displacement, 1 instance of psychological manipulation, and 1 storm dismantling. That is 10 distinct destruction categories across the show's 25 seasons, each resolved without lasting consequence, each restoring the house to its starting position on Conch Street. Recovery between episodes is always complete. No damage carries forward. No wall remains broken. No structural compromise persists. No legal designation continues past its episode. The house that exists at the start of any given episode of SpongeBob SquarePants is the same house that was at the start of the previous one, regardless of what the previous one did to it. This pattern is the show's most consistent commitment over its entire run, more consistent than any character trait, more consistent than any recurring joke. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every destruction ended the same way. The house came back, unmarked, ready for the next episode. But the most revealing version of the pineapple is not the one being eaten or frozen or pushed off a cliff. It is the one on a quiet Tuesday, when nothing unusual is happening, and SpongeBob is simply home. Section 8. What the house looks like on an ordinary Tuesday. For a show that rarely stops moving, SpongeBob SquarePants spends surprisingly little time inside 124 Conch Street. Most stories happen at the Krusty Krab, in Jellyfish Fields, or somewhere on the streets of Bikini Bottom. The episodes that stay inside the house are fewer, and they accumulate a different kind of knowledge about the building. They show what the house does on an ordinary morning, and what that reveals about the person who lives in it. Morning routines appear in almost every episode of the show, usually compressed into a few seconds before SpongeBob runs out the front door. Help Wanted established the template, The foghorn alarm goes off. SpongeBob launches off the diving board in his bedroom, lands in his square pants, feeds Gary, does a brief workout with his stuffed animal weights, and declares himself ready. The whole sequence lasts under a minute and communicates everything the audience needs to know about how the house functions as a domestic space. It is warm, it is active, and the person inside it treats every morning as though it is the most important morning that has ever existed. Foghorn alarm clocks go off at volumes measured in the range of 110 decibels, which is the sound level of a chainsaw at close range. SpongeBob's foghorn operates as a standard bedroom alarm. Nobody in the surrounding neighborhood appears to wake up when it goes off. Squidward, who lives close enough that SpongeBob's laughter can ruin his sleep, is never disturbed by the foghorn, which suggests the house absorbs the sound rather than projecting it outward. This is consistent with how the house handles all of its internal conditions. What happens inside stays inside until the story requires otherwise. Jellyfish Jam is Season 1, Episode 7B, which aired August 28, 1999. SpongeBob brings a jellyfish home from Jellyfish Fields, intending to keep it as a pet for the evening. The jellyfish plays music with him, more jellyfish arrive through the open door, and what began as a quiet night inside the house becomes an extended party that SpongeBob cannot control. The kitchen, the living room, and the stairs all fill with jellyfish. The house is used as a venue by creatures who were not invited as a group and have no intention of leaving on request. Gary drives them out by playing a song on a smaller instrument, which resolves the situation. Wild animals in domestic spaces are a recurring premise for episodes set inside the pineapple. The logic is always the same. SpongeBob's hospitality extends past what the house can absorb, and Gary is the one who fixes the consequences. Jellyfish Jam is the earliest and most complete version of that dynamic. SpongeBob opens the door. The house fills. Gary acts. The version of the house that emerges from that episode is a house that is fundamentally open, that does not protect itself from intrusion, and that requires someone other than its primary resident to maintain its boundaries. Procrastination aired October 19, 2001, as the first segment of Season 2, Episode 17. Mrs. Puff assigns SpongeBob an 800-word essay on what not to do at a stoplight, due the following morning. SpongeBob comes home enthusiastic and sits down to write. He does not write. He does calisthenics. He feeds Gary. He cleans the kitchen until it shines like chrome. He calls Patrick. He watches television. He does everything the house makes available to him, except the one thing he sat down to do. The episode is almost entirely set inside the pineapple, and the house in it is not a neutral space. It is an environment full of alternatives to the task. Writing an essay at home requires the house to cooperate, and in procrastination the house refuses. Every room offers something more immediately appealing than 800 words on traffic signals. The kitchen that SpongeBob cleaned to chrome finish is a kitchen he cleaned specifically instead of writing. The phone call to Patrick happened specifically instead of writing. The house is not sabotaging SpongeBob consciously at this stage, but the show understands that a domestic space is full of the things a person loves, and the things a person loves are always more compelling than the thing a person is supposed to be doing. Deadline pressure in the episode eventually produces a nightmare sequence after SpongeBob falls asleep at his desk. The possessions in the house begin coming to life in the dream. The chair speaks, his pants escape, the clock announces that time is up, a candle flame transforms into a creature that burns his essay and then sets the house itself on fire. The burning house becomes anthropomorphic and pleads with SpongeBob to stop wasting time before he wakes up. The nightmare condenses the episode's entire argument into one image. The house itself is fed up. The space that offered him every distraction has become the voice telling him the distraction was a mistake. Dreams in the episode escalate in a way that reveals something specific about how the show understands the pineapple. The house can only speak to SpongeBob inside his own unconscious, which is where the show places the most honest statements the building ever makes. The plea to stop wasting time is not delivered by a teacher, or a neighbor, or a deadline. It comes from the walls. This is the closest the show ever comes to suggesting that the house has a perspective on the person who lives in it, and the perspective is not gentle. Anthropomorphic houses appear in animation regularly, but a house that begs its resident to be better is a specific kind of anthropomorphism. It requires the building to have a stake in the residents' behavior, which means the house and the person are bound together in a way that goes past landlord and tenant. Procrastination made that bond explicit in a nightmare sequence, and then backed away from it when SpongeBob woke up, but the image held. The house in the show's best episodes is not a backdrop, it is the most invested party in the room. Sleepy Time is Season 1, Episode 15A, which aired January 17, 2000. The episode begins in SpongeBob's bedroom, showing the bed in the specific position established after the pilot, left side of the room, pillow at the head, Gary somewhere nearby. SpongeBob falls asleep and begins dreaming of driving a boat. The episode's premise then sends him out of his own dream and into the dreams of the people around him, visiting Patrick's dream, Sandy's dream, Squidward's dream, Mr. Krabs' dream, and Gary's dream in sequence. He leaves his bedroom at the start, and the episode spends most of its runtime outside it. Bedroom in that episode is the launching point for everything that follows, which is how the bedroom functions across the show's run. It is the room the day begins in, and the room it ends in. SpongeBob is shown waking up in it constantly. He is shown falling asleep in it occasionally. The space between those two events is the show. The bedroom is the punctuation of the episode, the before and after, and what happens in between takes place everywhere else. Have You Seen This Snail is a Season 4 special that aired November 11, 2005, running approximately 22 minutes. Gary runs away from home after SpongeBob becomes obsessed with a paddleball challenge and forgets to feed him for several days. SpongeBob eventually realizes Gary is gone and searches the house room by room. Each room that comes up empty is a room confirming the absence. The sequence is the show's most direct depiction of the house as a space shaped by a specific relationship. Gary's bowl is in the kitchen, Gary is not. The distinction between the object and the creature it belongs to, between the space and the life inside it, is what makes the search work as a piece of drama. Separation from Gary changes the house in a way the episode takes seriously, rather than playing for comedy. The pineapple with Gary is a home. The pineapple without Gary is a house that needs to be searched. The difference between those two things is not architectural. It is relational, and the episode understands that clearly enough to build its first act entirely around the specific texture of an empty room that should not be empty. Rockabye Bivalve is Season 3, Episode 7A, which aired March 29, 2002. SpongeBob and Patrick find a baby scallop and decide to raise it together, with SpongeBob taking the domestic role and Patrick supposedly going to work. The episode spends more time showing the interior of the house in active domestic use than almost any other in the first 3 seasons. The kitchen is used as a kitchen at scheduled mealtimes. The living room serves as a nursery. The stairs are climbed to put the baby down for the night. The house is doing the work a house is supposed to do, sheltering a family and organizing their daily rhythms. Parenting as a domestic theme forces the episode to treat the pineapple as a genuinely functional home rather than a cartoon backdrop. SpongeBob preparing food for the baby requires a kitchen that works at the right time of day. Putting the baby to sleep requires a quiet upper floor. These requirements ask the house to behave consistently across the episode's timeline in a way that most episodes never demand, because most episodes do not need the house to be a place where schedules matter. Rockabye Bivalve is one of the few episodes where the house has to function as a real domestic space rather than as the setting for a single scene. Night in the Pineapple looks different from day in ways the show depicts occasionally but does not dwell on. The exterior at night, with warm light coming through the blue windows against the dark of the ocean floor, is one of the most visually distinctive images associated with the show. The interior at night is dimmer, quieter, and more contained than the bright and active space of the morning routine. Sleepy Time begins at night. The nightmare sequence in Procrastination happens at night. The most emotionally weighted moments the show places inside the house tend to happen in the dark, which is consistent with how the show understands the relationship between time of day and the kind of story it wants to tell. Hospitality is what the house offers without qualification across every episode. Patrick arrives unannounced. Sandy visits for scientific reasons and personal ones. Characters who have no particular claim on the space are welcomed into it because SpongeBob's relationship to the house is an open one. He does not protect the pineapple from visitors. the way a person who treats their home as private space would protect it. He treats the house as a shared resource available to anyone he likes, which means the building functions less as a retreat than as an extension of SpongeBob's social life into a fixed address. Ownership of a domestic space in the show manifests most clearly when ownership is threatened. The episodes covered in the previous section, condemnation, sanctuary designation, psychological manipulation into leaving, all produce their comedy from the violation of something the audience has accepted as SpongeBob's. He owns the pineapple in the way that matters in the show's terms. It is his. It reflects him. It functions as his home. The legal and physical threats to it are funny precisely because the audience does not believe they will succeed, which means the ownership is total in the one register that counts. Quiet episodes built around daily life in the pineapple are the ones that accumulate the clearest picture of what the house is for. Procrastination shows it as a space that conspires against its residents' best intentions and then, in a nightmare, demands better from him. Jellyfish Jam shows it as a social space that overwhelms its host until Gary imposes a boundary. Have You Seen This Snail shows it as a space defined by the relationship inside it and what that space becomes when the relationship is broken. Rockabye Bivalve shows it doing the domestic work a house is designed to do, at the right times, in the right rooms. Ordinary use of the house tells more about the building than any of the destruction episodes do. The house is not defined by what consumed it or pushed it off a cliff. It is defined by the foghorn alarm, the round oven, the clamshell chairs, the bed on the left side of the room, and Gary's food bowl somewhere on the ground floor. It is defined by the things that happen inside it every day, across every episode, that is not about the house being endangered. Those are the days that make it a home, and there are more of those days than there are disasters, which is why the disasters never permanently win. Character accumulates through repeated behavior in a specific space, and SpongeBob's character is legible from the pineapple's contents. A person who has a library on the second floor reads. A person who has a workout room with stuffed animal weights tries to stay in shape and fails. A person who treats the house as an open door to anyone he likes values company over privacy. A person whose house speaks to him in a nightmare about wasting time takes his obligations seriously enough for the guilt to follow him into sleep. None of these facts require a dramatic episode to communicate. They accumulate across the ordinary ones, the quiet Tuesdays, the mornings before the foghorn stops echoing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The House on Ordinary Days reveals more about SpongeBob than any disaster episode does. What the next section covers is what happens when the house left Bikini Bottom entirely and entered the real world, through theatrical films, hotel villas, Lego bricks, and aquarium stores. Section 9. When the pineapple left the ocean and entered the real world. SpongeBob SquarePants has produced 3 theatrical films across its run, and the pineapple at 124 Conch Street appears in all of them, handled differently each time, depending on what the story required and what animation technology made possible. The 2004 movie used the house as a departure point before the story moved to Shell City. The 2015 Sponge Out of Water depicted it in the show's traditional two-dimensional animation while the characters traveled above the ocean in CGI. The 2020 Sponge on the Run rendered it fully in 3 dimensions for the first time in the franchise's history, as the primary visual mode rather than a brief appearance. On November 19, 2004, SpongeBob made the jump from television screens to the big screen for the first time. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie was directed by Steven Hillenburg, and Steven Hillenburg alone among the 3 films was the creator's own project, produced specifically because he had planned all along to end the show after the movie and use the film as the series finale. He did not get to end the show after the movie. Nickelodeon renewed the series regardless, which led to the post-Hillenburg era, but the movie itself stands as the version of the SpongeBob universe that Hillenburg was satisfied completing, and the pineapple in it is animated at a quality suited to theatrical presentation, cleaner and more detailed than the television version, without departing significantly from the established design. Film adaptations of television animation frequently use the theatrical format as an opportunity to upgrade the production. Character designs are sometimes refined, backgrounds become more elaborate, and the overall visual density increases to justify the cinema experience. The 2004 SpongeBob film follows this pattern. The Pineapple House appears primarily in its standard exterior view in the opening sequence and during the early scenes in Bikini Bottom. The film's story takes SpongeBob and Patrick to Shell City, which means the pineapple is not a central location for most of the runtime, but its appearances are rendered with the quality the theatrical budget allowed. Mixing two-dimensional characters with computer-generated environments and sequences was the visual strategy of the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, the second theatrical film, which opened in the United States on February 6, 2015. The film was directed by Paul Tibbitt and made over $300 million against a production budget of approximately $74 million. Its premise involves the characters leaving the ocean and entering the surface world, which the film depicted in live-action footage with the animated characters rendered in CGI. Bikini Bottom, when shown, was in the show's traditional 2D style. The pineapple appeared in 2D in the Bikini Bottom sequences and, by implication, existed in the same space as the CGI versions of the characters during their surface adventures. Box office performance of the SpongeBob film franchise confirmed that the property had an audience large enough to justify theatrical production multiple times over. Sponge Out of Water earned more than $300 million globally. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, the third film, was produced for theatrical release and ultimately debuted on Paramount Plus in North America on March 4, 2021, due to theater closures during the pandemic, followed by a Canadian theatrical release. The third film was produced entirely in CGI, and the Pineapple House appeared in three-dimensional form throughout. Its spiral fruitlet pattern, the Fibonacci-corrected version established after the Vi-Heart video, was rendered with the full depth and texture that CGI provides. Theme parks have made multiple attempts to bring Bikini Bottom into physical space, with varying degrees of completeness. Nickelodeon Universe, a theme park operated across several locations, has featured SpongeBob-themed attractions and environments, including elements that reference the Pineapple House. The parks provide a version of the visual world of the show that visitors can walk through rather than watch, which is a different relationship to the material than passive viewing provides. A child who walks through a recreation of Bikini Bottom is doing something experientially distinct from watching an episode, because the scale relationship between their body and the environment has changed. The house becomes something they can stand next to, rather than something they watch from a distance. Universal's involvement with Nickelodeon properties created points at which SpongeBob environments entered theme park contexts, though the most complete physical realization of the Pineapple House was produced not by a theme park, but by a luxury hotel. Punta Cana, in the Dominican Republic, is the location of Nickelodeon Hotels and Resorts Punta Cana, opened by Charisma Hotels in 2016, and on its grounds sits the Pineapple Villa. The villa is a 2-bedroom, 3-bathroom freestanding structure styled after the house at 124 Conch Street. It is described by the resort as the world's first and only pineapple villa, and no competing claim has been established since its opening. The exterior is designed to evoke SpongeBob's home as precisely as a functional luxury accommodation can, while complying with building codes and accommodating the requirements of adult guests who paid significantly for the experience. Nightly rates at the Pineapple Villa begin at $3,800 for up to 4 adults and 2 children, or 2 adults and 6 children. The rate is all-inclusive, which at this resort means all meals, beverages, 24-hour room service, and access to the resort's restaurants and spa facilities. A private butler service is included. The villa has its own infinity pool, private gardens, courtyard, outdoor shower, and jacuzzi. The indoor space runs to approximately 1,500 square feet and includes a private master suite with a king-size bed, a second bedroom on a loft level above the living room, a dining room, a play area, and a sitting area. The foyer is designed to reference the address 124 Conch Street specifically. Structural engineering of a pineapple-shaped building requires solving problems that a conventional rectangular structure does not present. A pineapple's exterior is not a simple curve. It is a compound surface, with the fruitlet pattern creating an irregular texture across a body that narrows at the top into a crown of leaves. Building a structure that reads as a pineapple to anyone who sees it while also functioning as a weatherproof dwelling suitable for guests paying nearly $4,000 a night, requires translating the cartoon's simplified version of that shape into materials that can be constructed, insulated, plumbed, and wired. The resort's version maintains the visual signature, the gold exterior, the leaf crown, the distinctive shape, while necessarily departing from the cartoon's proportions in ways that allow humans to use it comfortably. LEGO released their first SpongeBob SquarePants building sets in 2006, and 3 of the sets released across the license's run include the house at 124 Conch Street. Adventures in Bikini Bottom, set number 3827, builds the Pineapple House and Patrick's Rock in minifigure scale and includes SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward. Good Neighbors at Bikini Bottom, set number 3827, at 834, also includes the house. Bikini Bottom Undersea Party, set number 3818, builds a version suited for gathering the neighborhood together. Across all 3 sets, the house is built in brick form that approximates the exterior's distinctive shape and color, while accommodating the structural limitations of interlocking plastic bricks. Brick reproductions of fictional architecture face the same challenge as hotel reproductions, translating a curved, organic form into a medium that works in straight lines and right angles. LEGO designers solved this by using curved slope bricks and round plates to approximate the pineapple's shape, while accepting that a brick-built pineapple will read as a blocky representation rather than a faithful replica. The sets were popular enough that a new generation of SpongeBob LEGO sets released in the 2020s revisited the house with updated parts and more refined building techniques. The newer sets achieve a closer approximation of the exterior shape using bricks that had not been designed when the 2006 sets were produced. Aquarium ornaments are the most widely distributed physical version of SpongeBob's Pineapple House that exists in the world. The product category, which places a replica of the building at the bottom of a fish tank as decoration, is sold through pet supply retailers, online marketplaces, and general merchandise stores globally. The ornament is typically made from resin or plastic, sized to fit within a standard home aquarium, and designed with openings that allow fish to swim in and out. The joke implicit in the product, which many listings make explicit, is that the fish in the tank are replicating SpongeBob's situation, living in the pineapple the way he does. Fish sharing their tank with a pineapple ornament are, by the product category's own logic, doing exactly what SpongeBob does in the show. An actual fish, swimming through a replica of his house, in an actual body of water, is the closest approximation to the show's premise that exists in physical reality. The fish does not find the pineapple ornament beautiful, presumably. It finds it a convenient shelter, but the image of a real aquatic creature navigating the interior of SpongeBob's home resonates with enough people that the product has remained commercially available for decades. Minecraft's sandbox environment allows players to build any structure they can conceptualize using virtual blocks, and SpongeBob's Pineapple House has been a recurring subject for builders since the game's popularity began in the early 2010s. Video recordings of Pineapple House builds have accumulated millions of views on YouTube, with builders competing to produce the most accurate exterior, the most faithful interior, or the most elaborate recreation of the full neighborhood, including Squidward's Easter Island head and Patrick's Rock. The challenge of building a curved pineapple in a game that works in cubes mirrors the challenge that LEGO designers face with bricks, and the solutions builders arrive at independently tend to follow similar logic. Fan constructions in digital building games treat the Pineapple House as a project worth attempting specifically because it is recognizable. Building a generic yellow house in Minecraft has no particular resonance. Building SpongeBob's house creates a connection between the player's effort and the show's visual vocabulary, which is the draw. The completed builds are shared not primarily as demonstrations of building skill, but as recognitions of the source material, communications between people who share a reference. Treehouse of Horror X-Skis, the 33rd Halloween special produced by The Simpsons, included a segment that referenced SpongeBob's Pineapple House in the context of a theme park called SpongeBob's Sea. The appearance is brief and is primarily a visual gag, but it demonstrates the reach of the image into the broader animated comedy landscape. The Simpsons, which has been on the air since 1989, treating SpongeBob's house as a recognizable cultural object in its own Halloween anthology, confirms the pineapple's status as something anyone in the animated television audience can be expected to know. Casagrande's movie included SpongeBob and Squidward's houses in a brief appearance that functions as a cameo. The Casagrandes is a Nickelodeon show with a different cast and setting, and the inclusion of the Conch Street houses in the film places them in the category of widely shared Nickelodeon iconography rather than specifically SpongeBob content. The appearance is a signal that the pineapple belongs to a broader Nickelodeon universe, available to be referenced by any property the network produces, in the same way Mickey Mouse's ears appear across contexts that are not specifically any one Disney film. Crossovers of the house into other media follow a pattern visible in all durable animated properties. The image becomes available to other creators as shorthand, as a shared reference that does not require explanation, as something that can be placed in a frame and trusted to communicate immediately. The pineapple has reached that level of legibility. It appears in other shows, in games, in merchandise, in real hotels, and in aquarium stores, and in every context it communicates the same thing. This is the SpongeBob house. No further information is required. Icons separate from their sources, when audiences who know the icon do not necessarily know the source. A meaningful fraction of the people who would recognize SpongeBob's Pineapple House on sight have never watched the show with any consistency, and some have never watched it at all. The image traveled further than the show did, which is what happens to images that are simple enough to reproduce, distinctive enough to be recognized, and repeated often enough that they become part of the visual environment rather than part of any specific episode. Pineapple-shaped architecture predates the show and exists independently of it. The Dunmore Pineapple in Scotland, an 18th-century stone structure built in the shape of a pineapple, predates SpongeBob by roughly 220 years. The pineapple has been a symbol of welcome and hospitality in European and American architecture since the 17th century, appearing as a carved ornament on gateposts, doorways, and building facades. Hillenburg's choice to make SpongeBob's home a pineapple therefore landed within a long tradition associating the fruit with warmth and welcome, and that tradition has made the show's version feel culturally grounded in a way that a more arbitrary choice might not have. People who have never watched SpongeBob SquarePants encounter the Pineapple House as a commercial product, a hotel room option, an aquarium accessory, a Lego set, a video game building challenge, and a cameo in other shows. Their relationship to the image is different from the relationship of someone who watched Home Sweet Pineapple air in August 1999 and felt something when SpongeBob planted the seed. But the image reaches them anyway, in a form stripped of context, carrying only the shape and the color and the suggestion of something cheerful and familiar. Recognition of the image does not require the history. A 5-year-old seeing the pineapple for the first time at the resort in Punta Cana, or on the side of an aquarium ornament at a pet store, or in a Lego set box on a shelf, encounters something that looks exactly right without knowing why. The rightness is designed. Hillenburg drew a pineapple in the mid-1990s to see what would happen, and what happened is that the image acquired a life well beyond the context that produced it. 25 years of the pineapple existing in the world means that there are people for whom it has always been there. It preceded some of the people who watch it now. It preceded the social media platforms on which it circulates. It was designed before the internet made image sharing effortless, and it spread anyway, first through broadcast, then through merchandise, then through digital reproduction, at a scale that the original production team had no way to anticipate. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The pineapple left Bikini Bottom and became a hotel room, a toy, an aquarium, and a game challenge. What the final section covers is the full timeline assembled from all of these pieces, the question of what the house has meant across 25 years of one show, and what it says that the most famous house in animation was always a piece of fruit. Section 10, the anniversary specials, the pre-house era, and where the timeline stands truth or square, aired on November 6, 2009, and it did something no episode before it had attempted. It went back before the first episode and explained how the house arrived. The 10th anniversary special, produced to mark a decade of the show's broadcast run, chose to spend a significant portion of its runtime on the question that had never been addressed in 10 seasons. Where did the pineapple come from? The answer, a cargo ship carrying fruit and a pineapple falling into the water and landing on Squidward's secret garden, was the first formal addition to the house's timeline that predated the pilot. The show was 10 years old before it told the audience how the main setting of every episode had actually arrived. Anniversary specials arrive on a schedule the show has maintained across its full run. The 10th anniversary produced Truth or Square. The 20th anniversary produced SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, which aired July 12, 2019. The 25th anniversary produced Creepaway Camp, which aired October 10, 2024. Each of these productions arrived at a specific point in the show's timeline, and each one treated the house differently, which makes the 3 anniversary specials a compressed documentary of how the show's relationship to the pineapple has evolved across 25 years. Creepaway Camp is the 25th anniversary special, and it did not take place at the pineapple at all. The episode is a horror parody, set at a summer camp rather than on Conch Street, drawing on the Camp Coral spin-off setting to tell a Halloween-adjacent story. The house does not appear as a significant location in the special. This is a different relationship to the building than the 10th anniversary established, where the house's origin was the episode's most discussed revelation. By the 25th anniversary, the show had expanded its world enough that a full-length special could be set entirely elsewhere, and nobody considered it unusual. October 10, 2024, marks not just the premiere of Creepaway Camp, but a specific point in the house's broadcast timeline that reflects how much the show's context changed in the decade between the 20th and 25th anniversaries. In 2019, the main SpongeBob series was the only active production. By October 2024, 2 spin-offs were running alongside it. A 3rd season of The Patrick Star Show was airing. Camp Coral had concluded its run earlier that year on July 10th, and the main series was simultaneously in its 14th and 15th seasons. The Pineapple House was one location among many active Bikini Bottom productions, rather than the single defining address it had been throughout the original run. Squidiot Box is a season 14 episode that confirmed something about the house's interior that had been mentioned years earlier and never shown. The episode, which aired as part of the 25th anniversary season on February 12, 2024, formally established the attic of SpongeBob's house as a real space. The attic had been referenced verbally in the Season 8 episode Squid Baby over a decade earlier, without any visual confirmation. Squidiot Box finally placed a character inside it. An anniversary season proving the existence of a room mentioned 11 years earlier is a specific kind of archive work, the show cross-referencing its own history and closing a loop that most viewers had forgotten was open. Quarter century of the same address means the house now appears in more episodes than any other single location in the show's history by a considerable margin. Every season, every episode that begins on Conch Street, every morning routine and every exterior establishing shot, every opening sequence adds to the count. The house has appeared in more screen minutes than any character, any building, or any location in the show, including the Krusty Krab, which shares screen time with it across the full run. The pineapple at 124 Conch Street is the most depicted specific structure in the history of animated comedy, measured by episode count. Camp Coral offered the show's first sustained look at the period before the pineapple existed in Bikini Bottom. The spin-off, which premiered March 4, 2021 on Paramount+, is set during SpongeBob's childhood at a summer camp called Camp Coral. It depicts a younger SpongeBob before he ever moved to Bikini Bottom, before he applied for work at the Krusty Krab, and before a pineapple fell from a cargo ship onto Squidward's garden. In Camp Coral's timeline, 124 Conch Street does not exist as SpongeBob's address, because SpongeBob has not yet moved there. Pre-House era had never been explored as its own sustained narrative before Camp Coral. The show had gestured at SpongeBob's childhood in scattered flashbacks across the main series, most notably in Truth or Square, where the flashback showing his first visit to the Krusty Krab was one of the anniversary special's central sequences. But a dedicated series, set in the period before the pineapple, represented a structural expansion of the timeline in both directions. The main show runs from the pineapple's arrival forward. Camp Coral runs in the years before it arrived. Childhood in the show's world preceded the pineapple at 124 Conch Street by an unspecified period. Truth or Square established that when SpongeBob moved into the pineapple, he was looking for a home, which implies he had recently left his parents' house. The show's wiki confirms that he moved into the pineapple one day after leaving his parents' house. That one day of homelessness during which he and a real estate agent named Patty Rachid toured every available house in Bikini Bottom before the pineapple fell from the ship is the complete gap between his childhood home and his adult address. Camp Coral fills the years before that gap. Perspective from Conch Street's other resident runs through the Patrick Star Show, the second spin-off, which premiered July 9, 2021 on Nickelodeon. The show is set in approximately the same era as the main series, following Patrick Star in his own storylines. The Pineapple House exists during the Patrick Star Show's timeline, since SpongeBob already lives there when the spin-off is set, but it appears from the outside rather than being explored as a primary location. The Patrick Star Show occasionally places characters near or around the pineapple's exterior without making it a central setting. Concurrent timelines containing the pineapple now exist across the SpongeBob franchise in a way that has no precedent in the show's first decade. The main series, currently in season 15 and 16, depicts the house in its present-day Bikini Bottom. The Patrick Star Show depicted a contemporaneous version of the neighborhood from a different perspective. Camp Coral depicted the years before the house existed. The three productions created a layered timeline for the pineapple: past, present, and parallel present, all running in the same franchise simultaneously. Timeline Twist Up premiered on June 27, 2025, as a Season 16 special, and the episode's title is among the most directly relevant pieces of production information available for a video called The Complete Timeline of SpongeBob's House. An episode of SpongeBob SquarePants explicitly named after a timeline twist, produced in the show's 16th season, 26 years after the house first appeared on screen, is the kind of coincidence that the house's timeline occasionally produces. The episode involves SpongeBob and Patrick navigating some version of temporal disruption, which is appropriate for a franchise that has by that point accumulated an elaborate multi-production timeline across a quarter-century of broadcast. 15th and 16th seasons continued the house's presence at its established address without major structural changes. Season 15, which began its premiere split from Season 14 in July 2024, carried the 25th anniversary material through the end of that year. Season 16, which began in 2025, continued the main show's ongoing run. The house in these seasons is the house as it has been since the Weihart correction in 2012. Fibonacci-accurate exterior, 3-floor interior, same position on Conch Street relative to Squidward and Patrick, same foghorn alarm, same round oven. Big Birthday Blowout is the name of the 20th anniversary special, which aired July 12, 2019. Its relationship to the house is the most unusual of the three anniversary specials, because the special removes SpongeBob from Bikini Bottom entirely and places him in a live-action surface world while his friends prepare a birthday party in Bikini Bottom without him. The house is depicted as the party preparation site, which means the 20th anniversary special turns the pineapple into a setting without its primary resident for most of its runtime. The house exists in the special, but SpongeBob is not in it. The house and SpongeBob are separated for the anniversary episode, which is the opposite of what the 10th anniversary did, where the house's origin was the primary revelation. 20th anniversary established something about the house that the 10th anniversary had not, that the show could use the pineapple without SpongeBob being inside it, and that the building had accumulated enough independent significance that it functioned as a location rather than just as SpongeBob's location. The house as a party venue, decorated by the neighborhood characters, while its resident is elsewhere, is the house operating independently of its primary function, which is only possible after 20 seasons of establishing what that primary function is. Decade by decade, the house has been revisited through these specials in ways that trace the show's evolving understanding of what the building represents. The 10th anniversary used the house to answer the origin question. The 20th anniversary used the house as a party venue while its resident was away. The 25th anniversary largely moved past the house to tell a different kind of story. Each choice reflects where the production was in its relationship to the building, curious about it, comfortable with it, and finally expanded past it into a wider world where the pineapple is one location rather than the location. Without the anniversary specials marking these intervals, the house's timeline would be a continuous run of individual episodes without formal checkpoints. The specials create structure in the timeline, moments where the show consciously looked back at itself and made a decision about how to frame what the house had been and what it would become. Truth or Square's decision to explain the origin rather than assume it was the most consequential of these choices, and it remains the only time the show has directly addressed the house's own history as a subject rather than as a backdrop. Future of the house depends on the show's continuation, and the show has been renewed consistently through its current run into season 16 and beyond. The house will continue to appear at the start of episodes, the foghorn will continue to go off at the same time each morning, and the interior will continue to contain whatever rooms the story requires. The address will remain 124 Conch Street. The chimney at the back will remain non-functional by any physical law. The exterior will follow the corrected Fibonacci spiral pattern. The staircase will continue to switch sides. Renewed through its 16th season and counting, the Pineapple House has now been on screen for more than a quarter of a century, with no sign that its timeline is approaching an end. The pre-house era has been documented through Camp Coral. The origin has been shown through Truth or Square. The present has been maintained through hundreds of episodes. What has not been shown is the house's end, which the show has not written and shows no intention of writing, because ending the house would mean ending the show, and the show has consistently found reasons to continue. Archive of the house grows with every episode. Every morning the foghorn goes off. Every time SpongeBob runs from the front door to the Krusty Krab. Every exterior establishing shot. Every new room discovered inside the impossible interior adds another entry to a timeline that began on a ship somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, with a pineapple that nobody had placed there yet, and nobody was expecting to fall. The timeline of the house is the timeline of the show, and the show is still going. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.